In this video, I'll be walking you through the entire Dead Space timeline in complete chronological order, covering every major event from the ancient cosmic origins of the markers billions of years before humanity even existed, all the way through to the catastrophic final confrontation with the Brethren Moons in 2514. We're going to be examining the three mainline Dead Space games, the two animated films Downfall and Aftermath, the spin-off game Extraction, and the Awakened DLC, which together form the core narrative of this franchise. This timeline focuses on the primary narrative arc and does not delve into every minor comic, short story, or mobile game unless directly relevant to the main plot, because while there are supplementary materials out there like the various comics and the mobile title Dead Space for iOS, they either retread ground already covered in the main entries or provide flavor text that doesn't fundamentally alter our understanding of the timeline's progression. As always, throughout the video there will be a timeline animation at the bottom of the screen, so you can easily follow along and understand exactly when each event takes place, which is especially important for Dead Space because the story jumps between different time periods, locations, and characters, and keeping track of how the Ishimura Incident connects to the Sprawl Outbreak, and how both of those connect to the discoveries on Tau Volantis requires a clear visual reference point that shows you where we are in the overall sequence of events. Now, here's something that might surprise you if you've only played through the games once or twice. The true origin of the markers, the central antagonists of the Dead Space universe, predates humanity's existence by billions of years, making their influence far more ancient and cosmic than most players realize, and understanding this deep time scale completely reframes what the Dead Space series is actually about, transforming it from a story about a space mining disaster into something far more existentially terrifying. But before we get to any of that, we need to explain the setting first, because Dead Space takes place in a future where humanity has exhausted Earth's resources and turned to the stars out of pure necessity, not exploration or curiosity. And this context of desperation and survival is baked into every aspect of the universe, from the planet-cracking mining ships like the USG Ishimura to the religious movement known as Unitology that promises transcendence through death and rebirth, and without understanding the socioeconomic and spiritual climate of the 26th century, the events that unfold across the timeline won't carry the weight they're supposed to. The Dead Space universe is one where corporations wield more power than governments, where entire planets are systematically dismantled and consumed to feed humanity's endless hunger for resources, where the gap between the wealthy elite and the working class has widened to a point that would make our current era look egalitarian by comparison, and where a fringe religious cult has grown into a galaxy-spanning organization with billions of adherents, political influence, and enough money to fund expeditions to the furthest reaches of known space. This is a future built on extraction, exploitation, and exhaustion, where humanity has spread across the stars not as enlightened explorers but as desperate scavengers picking apart dead worlds to keep civilization running for just a few more decades. And into this bleak materialist reality comes something that defies all materialist explanation. The markers, artifacts of unknown origin that seem to offer unlimited energy, that inspire religious devotion in some and scientific obsession in others, and that carry with them a contamination so profound it doesn't just kill people but transforms them into components of a larger, more terrible organism. The markers are the central mystery of Dead Space, the thread that connects every game, every film, every incident across the timeline, and they operate on principles that blur the line between technology and biology, between physics and something that might as well be called magic. Though the characters in universe would never use that word because they're engineers and scientists and corporate administrators who need rational explanations for everything, even when they're watching their colleagues tear themselves apart and reanimate as twisted mockeries of human form. What makes the Dead Space timeline particularly interesting from a narrative structure perspective is that it's told almost entirely from the ground level, from the perspective of people who are caught in the middle of events they don't fully understand, who are trying to survive situations that escalate far beyond their control, and who only gradually, piece by piece, come to understand the true scope of what they're dealing with. Which means that as we move through the timeline chronologically, we're going to see the same patterns repeat across different locations and different casts of characters, the same stages of marker influence playing out again and again, and this repetition is not a flaw in the storytelling but the point, because the markers have been doing this for billions of years, and humanity is just the latest species to stumble into a trap that was set long before we climbed down from the trees. The timeline structure also means we'll be seeing how information is suppressed, how the truth about the markers is known to certain individuals and organizations but deliberately kept from the public, how each outbreak is contained or covered up, and how the cycle continues because the people in power either don't believe the warnings or believe they can control and exploit the markers for their own benefit, right up until the moment that control is lost and another ship or station or colony is transformed into a necromorph-infested nightmare. One of the things I want to emphasize as we go through this timeline is the difference between what characters know at any given point and what we, the audience, understand with the benefit of hindsight and multiple perspectives, because a huge part of Dead Space's horror comes from dramatic irony, from watching engineers like Isaac Clarke try to solve problems with the tools and knowledge available to them, while we can see the larger pattern they're trapped in, and this gap between character knowledge and audience knowledge widens as we move through the timeline, until by the time we reach Dead Space 3 and the Awakened DLC, both Isaac and the player finally understand the full horrifying truth that's been lurking beneath the surface since the very beginning. The Dead Space franchise is also notable for how it handles its expanded universe content, because unlike some franchises where the films and spin-off games feel like afterthoughts or cash grabs, the Dead Space animated films and Extraction actually fill in crucial gaps in the timeline, showing us events that are referenced in the main games but never directly depicted, giving us perspectives from characters who don't survive to appear in the games, and building out the world in ways that make the main narrative richer and more coherent. Downfall shows us the initial outbreak on the Ishimura before Isaac Clarke arrives. Extraction follows a parallel story on Aegis 7 during the same time period, and Aftermath bridges the gap between Dead Space 1 and Dead Space 2, explaining how the Sprawl Outbreak begins, and setting up the situation Isaac finds himself in at the start of, to understand the nightmare that will consume humanity, we need to go back, way back. Not centuries or even millennia, but billions of years into the past, to an era when the universe was young and teeming with civilizations we can barely imagine. This is where the horror of Dead Space truly begins, in the cold mathematics of extinction engineered on a cosmic scale. Billions of years ago, long before Earth had even formed, an alien civilization achieved something remarkable. We don't know their name. We don't know what they look like or what dreams they harbored for their future. What we do know is that they reached a level of technological sophistication that allowed them to peer into the very fabric of existence itself. They sought transcendence, a way to overcome the limitations of mortal flesh and achieve something greater. In their laboratories, using science and principles we still cannot fully comprehend, they created an artifact, a double helix structure, elegant and terrible, etched with strange symbols that seem to writhe and shift when observed. They called it the Marker. More specifically, this was the Black Marker, the original template from which all other markers would eventually descend. It stood roughly 3 meters tall, constructed from an unknown material that defied conventional analysis, and it pulsed with an energy signature unlike anything else in the known universe. The purpose of the Black Marker was ambitious beyond measure. It was designed to facilitate what its creators termed convergence, a process that would unite all biological life into a single, transcendent consciousness. Imagine it as the ultimate form of evolution, a forced ascension where individual existence would be shed like an old skin, and something new, something vast and eternal would emerge. The Marker was not just a monument or a power source. It was a machine with a singular function, a device that would broadcast a signal, a psychic frequency that would rewrite the fundamental behavior of organic matter itself. In the minds of its creators, this was the answer to mortality, to suffering, to the petty divisions that plague sentient life. They saw convergence as salvation. They could not have been more wrong. The moment the Black Marker was activated, everything changed. The signal it emitted was not the gentle call to enlightenment its creators had envisioned. Instead, it was a psychic assault, a frequency that burrowed into the neural pathways of every sentient being within its range. At first, the effects might have seemed subtle, whispers at the edge of perception, visions during sleep, a growing sense of unease that couldn't quite be explained. But the Marker's influence was insidious and exponential. Those exposed to its signal began to experience vivid hallucinations, often seeing the Marker itself in their mind's eye, its double helix structure rotating endlessly, hypnotically. They heard voices, sometimes their own, sometimes belonging to loved ones long dead, urging them toward a singular purpose: make us whole again. This phrase, or variations of it, became a mantra for those touched by the Marker's signal. It echoed through their thoughts, drowning out reason and self-preservation. The affected individuals began to exhibit increasingly erratic behavior. Paranoia spread through the population like wildfire. Trust eroded. Social structures collapsed. But the true horror was still to come. The Marker's signal didn't just drive people mad. It fundamentally altered their neurochemistry, their very perception of reality. Violent impulses that civilization had spent eons suppressing suddenly roared to the surface. People turned on one another with savage brutality. Murder became commonplace. But even more disturbing was the self-mutilation. Those under the Marker's influence began to harm themselves in grotesque ways, tearing at their own flesh, driven by an incomprehensible compulsion to reshape their bodies, to prepare themselves for what was coming. The civilization that had created the Black Marker tore itself apart within a remarkably short span of time. Cities burned, governments fell. The accumulated knowledge of perhaps millions of years of cultural and technological development was lost in an orgy of violence and madness. But the Marker's purpose was not destruction for its own sake. The death, the chaos, the mountains of corpses piling up across their world, all of it was merely the first stage of convergence. You see, the Marker didn't just affect living tissue. Its signal also interacted with dead biomass in profound and terrifying ways. The corpses of the fallen, the biological matter left behind by the civilization's collapse, began to change. At a cellular level, the Marker's energy rewrote the rules of biology itself. Dead tissue reanimated, but not in any way that resembled life as we understand it. The bodies rose, twisted, and reshaped by forces beyond natural law. Limbs fused together. Bones broke and reformed into new configurations. Flesh melted and merged, individual corpses losing their distinct identities as they combined into larger and larger amalgamations. These were the necromorphs, though that name wouldn't be coined for billions of years. They were biological weapons, driven by a hive intelligence linked directly to the marker's signal, and they had one purpose: to gather more biomass. Any survivors of the initial madness now faced a new nightmare. The dead had risen, and they were hunting. The necromorphs spread across the planet with terrifying efficiency, killing everything in their path and adding each new corpse to their growing mass. There was no escape, no sanctuary that could hold against the tide. The marker ensured that. Its signal guided the necromorphs, coordinated their attacks, drove them toward population centers where the harvest would be richest, and with each new victim, the mass of undead flesh grew larger, more complex. This accumulation of biomass was not random. The marker was orchestrating something, building toward a specific threshold. When enough biological matter had been gathered, when the necromorphs had consumed virtually every living thing on the planet and merged into a singular writhing mass of flesh and bone that covered continents, the final stage of convergence began. The marker's signal intensified, focusing all of its reality-bending energy on the colossal amalgamation of tissue. The biomass began to rise, lifting away from the planet's surface, reshaping itself according to a template encoded within the marker's very structure. What emerged was beyond comprehension. A brethren moon. Imagine a sphere of living tissue the size of a planet's moon, perhaps thousands of kilometers in diameter. Its surface was a landscape of grotesque organic structures, massive tendrils and orifices, all pulsing with malevolent life. But the most striking feature was the eye. A single, enormous eye, milky and ancient, that stared out into the cosmos with an intelligence that was vast, alien, and utterly hostile to life as we know it. This was not a creature in any conventional sense. It was a god, or perhaps a devil, born from the death of an entire world. The Brethren Moon was conscious, aware, and possessed of psychic abilities that dwarfed even the marker's influence. It could think across light years, communicate with others of its kind, and, most terrifying of all, it was hungry. The black marker that had started this process was no longer needed. The Brethren Moon absorbed it, integrated it, and in doing so gained the ability to create more markers. These would be red markers, copies of the original template, each one capable of initiating the convergence process on a new world. The Brethren Moon released these markers into space, sending them drifting on cosmic currents toward other star systems, other worlds teeming with life, and then it waited, patient and eternal, for its children to take root and begin the cycle anew. This is where the true scope of the horror becomes apparent. The process that consumed that first alien civilization was not an isolated tragedy. It was a template, a repeatable mechanism of extinction that would spread across the galaxy like a plague. When a marker reached a new world, it would embed itself, usually deep underground where it might remain hidden for eons. Its signal would begin to broadcast, subtle at first, perhaps influencing the evolution of life on that world, guiding it toward intelligence, toward civilization, toward the technological capability to find the marker and study it, because that was the trap. The marker's signal made sentient beings want to understand it, to unlock its secrets, to replicate it. And once they did, once they created their own markers or activated the original, the cycle would begin again. Madness, violence, death, necromorphs, and ultimately, a new Brethren Moon. World after world fell to this process. Civilizations that might have reached for the stars, that might have created wonders beyond imagining, were instead converted into fuel for the Brethren Moon's reproduction. Each new moon added to their numbers, and each new moon could create more markers, spreading the contagion further and faster. It was a geometric progression of extinction, a self-replicating apocalypse that consumed galaxies. The Brethren Moons were not individuals in the way we understand the term. They were a collective, a distributed consciousness that spanned the void between stars. They communicated with one another across impossible distances, sharing knowledge and coordinating their efforts. They were patient beyond human comprehension, willing to wait millions of years for a marker to bear fruit on some distant world. And they were always hungry. The Brethren Moons fed on the psychic energy released during convergence, on the terror and agony of dying civilizations, on the vast biomass they consumed and integrated into their forms. But more than that, they fed on the potential of life itself. Each civilization they destroyed represented countless futures that would never come to pass, infinite possibilities snuffed out and converted into a single, monolithic purpose. The moons were not just predators, they were the ultimate expression of cosmic horror, entities so vast and so alien that their very existence was an affront to the natural order. They turned the universe's tendency toward complexity and diversity into a machine for their own propagation. Over the billions of years that followed that first convergence, the Brethren Moons created an armada. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of these colossal entities drifted through the cosmos, each one a tombstone for an entire world. They spread through the galaxy in a slow but inexorable wave. their markers seeding world after world. Some civilizations might have fought back, might have recognized the danger and destroyed the markers before convergence could occur, but the marker's psychic influence made that nearly impossible. It clouded judgment, inspired obsession, made its victims into unwitting accomplices in their own destruction. The signal whispered promises of enlightenment, of unity, of an end to suffering. And by the time the truth became apparent, it was always too late. This was the state of the universe for eons. The Brethren Moons reigned supreme, apex predators on a galactic scale, and nothing could challenge their dominance. They had perfected a system of reproduction that required no effort on their part beyond the initial seeding. The markers did all the work, and the psychic compulsion they generated ensured a steady supply of new worlds to consume. The moons themselves could remain dormant for vast stretches of time, conserving energy, waiting for the signal that a new convergence was underway and a new sibling was about to be born. But there was a problem, one the Brethren Moons might not have anticipated in their alien consciousness. The universe is vast, but it is not infinite. Stars die. Worlds become lifeless rocks, and most crucially, intelligent life capable of triggering convergence is rare and precious. The Brethren Moons were consuming the galaxy's potential faster than new civilizations could arise. They were victims of their own success, an invasive species that had so thoroughly dominated their ecological niche that they were beginning to run out of prey. The distances between suitable worlds grew larger. The wait between convergences grew longer. The Brethren Moons began to hunger in a way they never had before. This hunger would drive them to ever more desperate measures in the eons to come. They would refine the marker signal, make it more compelling, more irresistible. They would learn to guide the evolution of primitive life, shepherding it toward intelligence over millions of years, cultivating future meals with the patience of farmers tending crops. And eventually, their attention would turn to a small, unremarkable yellow star on the outer arm of the galaxy. Orbiting that star was a blue and green world, teeming with life, where a young species was just beginning to reach for the cosmos. The Brethren Moons had already sent a marker there long ago, buried deep beneath the surface of a lifeless moon, waiting for the day when humanity would be ready to find it. That day was coming soon, leaping forward across countless millennia. From the ancient cosmic horror of the Brethren Moons to humanity's own era, we arrive at the 23rd century. This is when our species, still young in the grand scheme of galactic history, stumbles upon something that will forever alter the course of human civilization. It is here, in our own backyard, buried beneath millions of years of geological history, that we make first contact with the markers. The discovery happens in the Chicxulub crater, located on the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. You might recognize this name from your high school science classes. This is the impact site where, 66 million years ago, an asteroid struck Earth and triggered the mass extinction event that wiped out the dinosaurs. The crater itself spans roughly 150 kilometers in diameter, and over the centuries since its identification, it has been extensively studied by geologists, paleontologists, and planetary scientists seeking to understand that cataclysmic moment in Earth's history. But in the early 23rd century, a deep core drilling operation, part of an ambitious geological survey project, penetrates far deeper into the crater structure than anyone had previously attempted. What the drilling team finds is not merely ancient rock strata or impact metamorphic minerals. Instead, their instruments detect an anomalous object, something artificial, something impossibly old, buried at a depth that should make its existence impossible. This object is the black marker, the original marker, the template from which all others would eventually be copied. Standing roughly 3 meters tall, the artifact is a smooth, double helix-shaped monolith, jet black in color and covered from base to apex in intricate geometric patterns and symbols that seem to shift and writhe when observed directly. The symbols are not decorative. They are, in fact, a form of information storage, a genetic and mathematical code of staggering complexity. The marker's surface is composed of an unknown material that defies easy classification. It is not stone, not metal, not any compound found in the periodic table as humanity understands it. Initial spectrographic analysis returns contradictory results. Some instruments registered as organic, others as crystalline, still others as something in between. The object radiates a low-level electromagnetic field, pulsing at irregular intervals, and emits trace amounts of exotic particles that should not exist under known physics. The discovery is immediately classified at the highest levels of the Earth government. In this era, Earth is governed by a centralized administrative body, a precursor to the institutions that will later evolve into the sprawling bureaucracy of the Concordance Extraction Corporation and other megacorporations that dominate human space. But at this point in history, governments still hold significant power, and they recognize that this find is too significant, too potentially dangerous to be made public without careful study. A research facility is constructed directly above the excavation site, built with secrecy as its primary design principle. The official story released to the public describes the site as a continuation of the Geological Survey, nothing more. Access is restricted to a select group of scientists, each chosen for their expertise and their ability to maintain operational security. The research team assembled to study the black marker represents the best minds humanity can offer. Physicists, xenoarchaeologists, a relatively new field dealing with hypothetical alien artifacts, geneticists, mathematicians, neurologists, and engineers all converge on the site. Their mandate is simple in its stating but monumentally complex in its execution. They must determine what the marker is, where it came from, how it works, and most importantly, what humanity can learn from it. The initial weeks of study are marked by excitement and wonder. Here is proof, undeniable proof, that humanity is not alone in the universe, that intelligent life existed long before our species took its first steps. The marker predates human civilization by an unimaginable span of time. Carbon dating and radiometric analysis suggest it has been buried in the Chicxulub crater for at least 66 million years, possibly much longer. The implications are staggering. Did the marker arrive with the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs? Was its presence somehow connected to that extinction event, or had it been on Earth even longer, waiting in the depths until someone finally dug deep enough to find it? The scientists begin the painstaking work of decoding the symbols that cover the marker's surface. This proves to be far more challenging than anyone anticipated. The patterns are not simply decorative or even a straightforward written language. They are a form of hyperdense data storage, encoding multiple layers of information simultaneously. On one level, the symbols represent genetic sequences, blueprints for DNA structures that do not match any known terrestrial organism. On another level, they contain mathematical formulas and physical constants, some of which align with known science, others that suggest entirely new branches of physics. On yet another level, deeper still, there appear to be what can only be described as instructions, though instructions for what remains unclear. The code is self-referential, recursive, and seems to require an understanding of its entirety before any single part can be truly comprehended. It is a puzzle designed to be nearly unsolvable, or perhaps designed to be solved only by minds that have reached a certain level of advancement. While the linguistic and mathematical teams work on decoding the symbols, other researchers focus on the marker's energy properties. The electromagnetic field it generates is weak but constant, and it seems to interact with biological tissue in unusual ways. Experiments with simple organisms, bacteria, and single-celled organisms show accelerated mutation rates when exposed to the field. Plants grow faster but develop strange deformities. Lab mice exhibit increased aggression and abnormal brain activity. The marker appears to be broadcasting something, a signal of some kind, operating on frequencies that affect living nervous systems. The researchers theorize that the marker might be a form of communication device, or perhaps a beacon, though who or what it might be trying to contact remains unknown. It is around this time that the first subtle problems begin to emerge among the research staff. At first, the issues seem minor, easily dismissed as the natural stress of working on such a momentous project under conditions of intense secrecy. Researchers report difficulty sleeping, some complain of headaches persistent and resistant to medication, others mention vivid dreams, unusually intense and often disturbing. The facility's medical officer notes these complaints but finds no physiological cause. The symptoms are attributed to overwork, to the pressure of the assignment, to the artificial lighting in the underground facility. Recommendations are made for better rest schedules and stress management, but the work is too important, too urgent, to slow down significantly. As weeks turn into months, the symptoms intensify and spread. Nearly every member of the research team begins experiencing what they describe as hallucinations, though they occur while the subjects are fully awake and otherwise lucid. Researchers report seeing people who are not there, colleagues who left the facility weeks ago or who are currently in other sections of the complex. They hear voices, whispers in empty corridors, conversations that stop the moment they enter a room. Some see symbols, the same symbols from the marker's surface, appearing on walls and floors and computer screens where they should not be. The hallucinations are vivid, detailed, and deeply unsettling. What makes them particularly disturbing is their specificity. The visions often contain personal information, memories from the researcher's past, or they take the form of deceased loved ones. A physicist sees his dead wife walking the facility halls. A geneticist has conversations with her stillborn child. A security officer is visited nightly by his brother, killed years ago in an industrial accident. The psychological impact on the research team is severe. Paranoia begins to spread through the facility like a contagion. Researchers become suspicious of one another, questioning whether their colleagues are real or hallucinations. Trust breaks down. Collaboration becomes difficult when you cannot be certain that the person you are speaking with actually exists. Some staff members refuse to leave their quarters. Others become obsessed with their work, spending 18 or 20 hours a day in the labs, driven by a compulsion they cannot fully explain. They describe feeling pulled toward the marker, drawn to it as if it is calling to them specifically. Several researchers request transfer off the project, citing mental health concerns, but their requests are denied. The project is too sensitive, and the government cannot risk having potentially compromised individuals leaving the secure facility with knowledge of the marker's existence. The facility's psychological staff attempts to manage the crisis, but they too are affected. Therapy sessions become surreal, with both therapist and patient uncertain of what is real. Medication provides no relief. The hallucinations continue regardless of pharmaceutical intervention, which suggests that their source is not chemical imbalance or stress-induced psychosis, but something external, something environmental. The connection to the marker becomes impossible to ignore. The symptoms are strongest in personnel who spend the most time in direct proximity to the artifact. Researchers who work in labs farthest from the marker's chamber report fewer and less intense experiences. A pattern emerges. The marker is not simply a passive object of study. It is active. It is doing something to the people around it, reaching into their minds, manipulating their perceptions, perhaps even their thoughts. Emergency protocols are enacted. Exposure to the marker is limited to short, supervised sessions. Shielding is erected around the artifact's chamber, layers of lead and other dense materials intended to block its electromagnetic emissions. The shielding proves largely ineffective. The marker's influence seems to penetrate physical barriers with ease, suggesting that whatever mechanism it uses to affect human consciousness operates on principles not yet understood by human science. The research continues, but now it proceeds with a growing sense of dread. The scientists begin to understand that they are not simply studying an alien artifact. They are being studied in turn, or perhaps being changed, reshaped by exposure to something that operates according to rules fundamentally alien to human understanding. Reports from the facility grow increasingly alarming. There are incidents of violence, researchers attacking one another without clear provocation. There are unexplained deaths, suicides officially, though the circumstances are often bizarre. One researcher is found in the marker's chamber, having somehow bypassed multiple security checkpoints, dead from self-inflicted wounds, symbols carved into his own flesh that match those on the marker's surface. Another simply walks into a sealed airlock and opens it to the outside, dying instantly from the pressure differential. The facility's director sends urgent communications to the Government Oversight Committee, recommending that the project be suspended, that the marker be resealed, that the entire site be abandoned before more lives are lost. The Earth government, faced with mounting evidence of the marker's danger, finally acts. The decision is made at the highest levels of authority to terminate active research on the black marker. The artifact has provided tantalizing glimpses of advanced science and technology, hints of energy generation methods and genetic manipulation techniques far beyond current human capabilities. But the cost in human lives and sanity is deemed too high. The potential benefits, whatever they might be, are not worth the risk of continued exposure. Orders are issued to shut down the facility, to evacuate all personnel, and to seal the marker back in its underground tomb, deeper than before, more secure than before, with multiple redundant containment measures to ensure it remains undisturbed. The evacuation is conducted with military precision. Researchers are removed from the site in small groups, quarantined, and subjected to extensive psychological evaluation. Many never fully recover from their experiences. Some spend the rest of their lives in psychiatric care, haunted by visions that never completely fade. Others simply disappear into obscurity, their work on the marker classified so deeply that acknowledging their involvement would be a criminal act. The facility itself is dismantled, its equipment destroyed or removed, its records sealed under the highest classification levels. The excavation site is refilled, the crater restored as much as possible to its original state. The black marker is encased in a specially designed containment vessel, a tomb within a tomb, surrounded by warning systems and failsafes intended to alert authorities if the seal is ever breached. Official records of the marker's discovery and the research conducted on it are locked away in government archives, accessible only to individuals with the highest security clearances. The public never learns of the discovery. As far as the world knows, the Chicxulub Geological Survey found nothing more interesting than ancient rock layers and impact debris. But within the corridors of power, among the military and intelligence leadership, among the corporate executives who are beginning to exert increasing influence over government policy, the knowledge persists. The marker exists. It is real. And despite the danger it represents, despite the madness and death it brought to those who studied it, the potential it offers is too great to forget. The data collected during those months of research is preserved, analyzed in secret, and slowly, carefully, plans begin to form. Plans for how the marker's secrets might be unlocked safely. Plans for how its power might be harnessed. Plans that will, in time, lead to consequences far more terrible than anyone in this era can possibly imagine. 2 centuries after the black marker was sealed away, humanity's relationship with the artifact would take a dark and unexpected turn. In the early 23rd century, as Earth's resources continued to dwindle and off-world colonies expanded across the solar system, the government quietly resumed research on the marker, desperate for the unlimited energy solution it seemed to promise. What they didn't anticipate was that one man's discovery would transform the marker from a classified military secret into the foundation of humanity's most powerful and dangerous religion. Dr. Michael Altman was not supposed to be a prophet. He was a marine biologist and geophysicist working for the Dredger Corp mining consortium near the Chicxulub crater off the Yucatan Peninsula. In 2214, his team detected an unusual electromagnetic signature emanating from beneath the ocean floor, something that defied conventional explanation. The signal pulsed with a regularity that suggested artificial origin, and when Altman's crew finally excavated the source, they found something impossible. The black marker, buried for over 200 years, had somehow been calling out, its signal penetrating miles of rock and water. Altman became obsessed with understanding the artifact. Unlike the government researchers who had studied it before, he approached the marker without preconceptions, documenting everything with scientific rigor. He noticed the strange symbols covering its surface, patterns that seemed to shift and rearrange themselves when observed from different angles. He recorded the way electronics malfunctioned in its presence, how compasses spun wildly, how his own thoughts became clearer and more focused the longer he spent near it. But he also noticed something the previous researchers had either missed or deliberately concealed. The marker was not just broadcasting a signal, it was receiving one, communicating with something far away, something that existed beyond human understanding. As Altman dug deeper into classified files and cross-referenced geological data, he made a horrifying discovery. The marker was not a human creation at all, despite what the government had claimed in its internal documents. The artifact predated human civilization by millions of years. The symbols on its surface were not decorative. They were instructions, a genetic blueprint for something called recombination. Altman realized that the marker was designed to interact with dead tissue, to reanimate and reshape it according to the encoded patterns. The energy signature it emitted was not a power source to be harnessed. It was a signal meant to trigger a transformation in organic matter, a process that would culminate in what the marker's programming referred to as convergence. The implications terrified Altman. He understood that the marker was not a gift from advanced aliens or a miraculous energy solution. It was a trap, a doomsday device left by an extinct civilization, or perhaps created by something that wanted to spread its own twisted form of life across the galaxy. The unlimited energy it appeared to offer was merely bait, a lure to ensure that any species discovering it would replicate the marker and spread it to other worlds. Convergence, he realized, was not transcendence or enlightenment. It was extinction, the transformation of all organic life into something else entirely, something that served the marker's ultimate purpose. Altman tried to warn everyone. He compiled his research, documented the marker's true nature, and prepared to go public with his findings. He contacted journalists, sent encrypted files to scientific institutions, and even attempted to reach government officials who might listen. But the Earth government, now operating under the newly formed Earth government, or EarthGov, had invested too much in the marker project to allow the truth to surface. They had already begun manufacturing copies of the black marker, reverse engineering its structure to create what they called red markers. These replicas were designed to be deployed on colony worlds, ostensibly to provide clean energy, but actually to continue research into the marker's properties under controlled conditions. EarthGov could not afford to have Altman expose the marker program. The political and economic consequences would be catastrophic. So they made a decision that would echo through the centuries. They sent a team to silence Altman permanently. The official story, released to the public in 2215, reported that Dr. Michael Altman had died heroically while trying to save his research team from a catastrophic equipment failure at the Chicxulub excavation site. He was posthumously awarded commendations for his scientific contributions and his sacrifice. The marker itself was quietly relocated to a secure government facility, and the excavation site was sealed and declared off-limits. But EarthGov made a critical miscalculation. Altman had not worked alone, and his warnings had reached more people than they realized. A small group of his colleagues, research assistants, and friends had received fragments of his data, portions of his theories about the marker's true nature. More importantly, they had witnessed his passion, his conviction that the marker represented something profound and transformative. When news of his death reached them, they did not believe the official story. They knew Altman had been murdered, silenced, because he had uncovered a truth too dangerous for the government to acknowledge. These followers began to meet in secret, sharing what they knew of Altman's research and trying to piece together his final conclusions. But as they studied the fragments of data he had left behind, something strange happened. The information became distorted, filtered through grief and the very marker signal that still pulsed from EarthGov's research facilities. The followers began to interpret Altman's warnings not as a call to destroy the markers, but as a revelation about humanity's destiny. They convinced themselves that Altman had discovered the path to human transcendence, that the markers were indeed divine artifacts, and that his death was not a murder but a martyrdom. He had, they believed, sacrificed himself to protect the sacred knowledge from those who would suppress humanity's evolution. Within months of Altman's death, the first Unitology gatherings were held in underground meeting spaces across Earth's major cities. The name itself was chosen to reflect their core belief, that the markers represented unity, the convergence of all human consciousness into something greater. They adopted Altman as their prophet, reinterpreting his scientific warnings as spiritual teachings. The symbol they chose for their movement was a stylized representation of the marker itself, a double helix intertwined with reaching hands, symbolizing humanity's grasp toward transcendence. EarthGov initially dismissed Unitology as a fringe cult, a minor nuisance that would fade once the novelty wore off. They could not have been more wrong. The Church of Unitology, as it formally incorporated itself in 2220, offered something that mainstream society could not provide. In an era of resource scarcity, overcrowded cities, and the grinding uncertainty of colonial expansion, Unitology promised meaning. It told people that their suffering had purpose, that humanity was on the verge of a glorious transformation. The markers, which EarthGov had tried so hard to keep secret, became an open secret. whispered about in Unitology services as the sacred artifacts that would lead believers to convergence. The church grew with shocking speed. By 2230, Unitology had established chapters on every major Earth city and had begun spreading to the outer colonies. Its message resonated particularly strongly with colonists, people who had left Earth behind in search of better lives but found only harsh conditions and corporate exploitation. Unitology offered them hope, a belief that their struggles were temporary, that convergence would soon unite all humanity in a state of perfect understanding and eternal peace. What made Unitology truly dangerous was its organizational sophistication. The church's leadership, calling themselves the Circle of Adherents, structured the organization like a corporation, with strict hierarchies, financial systems, and political lobbying arms. They recruited not just the desperate and the faithful, but also the wealthy and the powerful. Unitology offered social networks, business connections, and a sense of belonging to the elite as much as to the masses. Within 2 decades, Unitology had become one of the wealthiest organizations in human space, with assets rivaling those of major planetary governments. The church's doctrine evolved rapidly during these early years. The core belief remained constant. The markers were divine artifacts left by an advanced alien civilization, and they held the key to human transcendence through convergence. But the details became increasingly elaborate. Unitology taught that Michael Altman had been the first to truly understand the markers, that his death had been a necessary sacrifice to awaken humanity to its destiny. They claimed that convergence would unite all human consciousness, eliminating death, suffering, and separation. It would be, they preached, the ultimate expression of unity, the moment when humanity would join with the divine intelligence that created the markers. What the faithful did not know, what even most of the Circle of Adherents did not understand, was that their entire religion was built on a foundation of misinterpreted warnings and government manipulation. EarthGov, recognizing that they could not suppress Unitology without creating martyrs and strengthening the movement, chose instead to infiltrate and guide it. Government agents and corporate interests quietly shaped Unitology's doctrine, ensuring that the church's interpretation of the markers aligned with EarthGov's own agenda. If people wanted to worship the markers, let them. Their faith would make them more accepting of the red marker installations that EarthGov was secretly deploying across colony worlds. By the mid-24th century, Unitology had become an unstoppable force in human society. The church operated schools, hospitals, and charitable organizations. It owned mining corporations, shipping companies, and media networks. Unitology representatives sat on colonial councils and advised government officials. The church had become so integrated into the fabric of human civilization that opposing it was political suicide. Politicians courted Unitology endorsements, corporations partnered with church-owned businesses, and millions of ordinary people found comfort and community in its teachings. The red markers, meanwhile, continued to spread. EarthGov deployed them to colony worlds under various pretexts, always with official explanations about energy research or scientific advancement. Unitology celebrated each new marker installation as a step toward convergence, holding massive rallies and prayer services near the sites. The faithful believed they were witnessing the unfolding of a divine plan. They had no idea they were participating in an experiment that would eventually threaten all human life. The tragedy of Unitology's rise was that it contained a grain of truth. Michael Altman had indeed discovered something profound about the markers. He had understood their purpose and tried to warn humanity. But his warnings had been twisted into their opposite, transformed from a cry of alarm into a call to worship. The religion that bore his name taught the exact opposite of everything he had tried to communicate. Where Altman had seen danger, Unitologists saw salvation. Where he had urged destruction of the markers, they demanded their proliferation. The man who had died trying to save humanity had become, in death, the prophet of humanity's potential doom. As the 24th century progressed, Unitology's influence only grew stronger. The church had successfully positioned itself as a mainstream religion, no longer a cult, but a respected institution with billions of adherents across human space. Its youngest members had never known a world without Unitology, had grown up believing in convergence as naturally as previous generations had believed in older faiths. The markers were no longer mysterious artifacts, but symbols of hope, promise, and humanity's glorious future. No one in the church's leadership, not even the most senior members of the Circle of Adherents, understood what convergence truly meant. They would not learn the truth until it was far too late, until the markers had spread too far to be contained, until the signal they broadcast had reached critical mass. The seeds of humanity's greatest crisis had been planted in the grief and misunderstanding that followed Michael Altman's death, and they had grown into a galaxy-spanning religion that would, in time, bring humanity to the brink of extinction. The path to hell, as the old saying goes, is paved with good intentions. In the case of Unitology, it was paved with faith in artifacts that were never meant to save anyone. 200 years after the Earth government first discovered the black marker and Unitology began its rise, the consequences of humanity's obsession with these alien artifacts would finally come to a head. In the year 2508, the USG Ishimura, one of humanity's most advanced planet cracker vessels, arrives at Aegis 7th, a remote mining colony on the far edge of colonized space. The ship's mission is routine by the standards of the 26th century: crack the planet's crust, extract valuable minerals, and move on to the next world. But what the Ishimura's crew discovers beneath Aegis 7's surface will transform this routine operation into humanity's first direct encounter with the horror the markers were designed to unleash. The USG Ishimura is not just any mining ship. She is the pride of the Concordance Extraction Corporation fleet, a massive vessel stretching over a mile in length, capable of housing over 1,000 crew members and their families. Planet crackers like the Ishimura represent the pinnacle of humanity's resource extraction technology. These ships use gravity tethers and massive mining lasers to literally tear chunks from planetary surfaces, processing entire mountains of ore in their cavernous refineries. The Ishimura herself has been in service for decades, cracking planets across known space, and her crew are experienced professionals who have seen it all. Or so they believe. The colony on Aegis VII has been struggling. Established by the Concordance Extraction Corporation as a mining outpost, the settlement houses several hundred colonists who have been working to extract resources from the planet's mineral-rich crust. But recently, something has changed. Productivity has declined, and reports filtering back to the corporation hint at unrest among the workers, unusual accidents, and a growing sense of unease that no one can quite explain. When a survey team discovers something buried deep beneath the colony, something that matches the energy signature of the legendary marker artifacts, the corporation sees an opportunity. They immediately dispatch the Ishimura to retrieve it. The object they find is a red marker, a replica of the black marker that the Earth government created 2 centuries earlier. Standing roughly 3 meters tall, the artifact is covered in the same indecipherable alien glyphs that adorned its predecessor, and it pulses with an eerie crimson glow. The colony's administrator, a devout unitologist named Benjamin Mathias, believes this discovery is a sign, a divine gift that will bring about the convergence his religion has long prophesied. He orders the marker brought to the surface and installed in the colony's central plaza, where colonists can see it, where they can bask in what he believes is its holy presence. This decision will doom everyone on Aegis VII. What Mathias and the other unitologists do not understand, what even the Earth government scientists who created the red markers never fully grasped, is that these artifacts are not gifts. They are weapons, or perhaps more accurately, they are tools designed for a specific and terrible purpose. The marker immediately begins broadcasting a signal, an electromagnetic pulse that operates on frequencies that interact directly with human neural tissue. You cannot hear it with your ears, cannot see it with your eyes, but your brain receives it nonetheless. And once that signal takes hold, it begins to change you. The effects start subtly. Colonists report trouble sleeping, vivid nightmares filled with strange symbols and whispered voices. Some experience hallucinations, seeing dead loved ones or hearing commands that seem to come from inside their own heads. The colony's medical staff note a sharp increase in psychological disturbances, but they attribute it to the stress of frontier life, to the isolation and harsh conditions of living on a barely terraformed world. They prescribe sedatives and recommend counseling. They have no idea that the marker signal is rewriting the neural pathways of everyone within its range, preparing them for what comes next. Among those affected is Benjamin Mathias himself. The colony administrator becomes increasingly erratic, preaching about the marker with manic intensity, insisting that it is showing him visions of humanity's glorious future. Other unitologists in the colony rally to him, forming a cult within a cult, convinced that the marker is speaking directly to them. But not everyone is susceptible to the signal in the same way. Some people, through quirks of brain chemistry or neural structure, prove more resistant to its influence. They watch with growing alarm as their friends and colleagues descend into madness. When the Ishimura arrives in orbit and begins preparations to transport the marker to the ship, the situation on Aegis VII has already deteriorated significantly. The colony is on the verge of chaos, with Mathias and his followers refusing to allow the artifact to be removed, while others beg the ship's crew to take it away, sensing somehow that it is the source of their troubles. Captain Benjamin Mathias, the ship's commanding officer, makes the decision to proceed with the retrieval despite the unrest. It is a decision he will not live long enough to regret. The marker is brought aboard the Ishimura and secured in the ship's cargo hold, and that is when the real nightmare begins. Because the marker does not just drive people insane, that is merely the first stage of its function. The signal it broadcasts contains information, a genetic blueprint encoded in electromagnetic pulses, and when human cells are exposed to this information under the right conditions, particularly after death, they begin to transform. Dead tissue reanimates, restructures itself according to the marker's template, and creates something new. Something that should not exist. The crew of the Ishimura are about to discover what happens when human remains are exposed to the marker signal. They are about to meet the necromorphs. The first outbreak occurs in the colony medical facility. Bodies in the morgue, corpses of colonists who succumb to accidents or suicide in the days since the marker's discovery suddenly reanimate. But these are not zombies in any traditional sense. The transformation is biological, a rapid and grotesque restructuring of dead flesh into new forms optimized for killing and spreading the infection. Limbs elongate and sharpen into blades. Bones burst through skin to form armor and weapons. What emerges from those morgue drawers are creatures that seem designed by a malevolent intelligence. each one a unique horror adapted from the human form it once was. These are necromorphs, and the name is grimly appropriate. Necro for death, morph for change. They are not undead in any supernatural sense, but rather repurposed biological matter, human bodies transformed by the marker signal into something that exists only to kill and create more of its kind. And they reproduce through a process as horrifying as their appearance. When a necromorph kills a human, the victim's body becomes raw material. The marker's signal, now amplified by the necromorphs themselves, causes the fresh corpse to undergo the same transformation, creating a new monster. 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 4, and the infection spreads exponentially. The colony falls within hours. The necromorphs tear through the settlement, killing everyone they encounter, and each death adds to their numbers. The few survivors barricade themselves in secure locations, but it is only a matter of time. Matthias, his mind completely broken by the marker's influence, welcomes the creatures as angels of convergence, right up until they tear him apart. His body, like all the others, joins the growing horde. Aboard the Ishimura, Chief Security Officer Alyssa Vincent watches the colony's descent into chaos through surveillance feeds and panicked radio transmissions. Vincent is a career security professional, tough and competent, someone who has handled riots and industrial accidents without flinching. But nothing in her training has prepared her for what she is seeing. When contact with the colony is lost entirely, she recommends to Captain Matthias that they leave orbit immediately, that they abandon the marker and flee before whatever is happening down there spreads to the ship. But it is already too late. The marker in the cargo hold is broadcasting its signal throughout the Ishimura, and the ship's crew, over 1,000 people living and working in close quarters, are all within range. The psychological effects that plague the colony now manifest aboard the ship. Crew members experience hallucinations, violent outbursts, and suicidal impulses. The ship's medical bay fills with patients suffering from what the doctors diagnose as shared psychotic episodes, but sedation and restraints prove useless against the marker's influence. And when people start dying, either by suicide or violence, their bodies begin to change. The outbreak aboard the Ishimura starts in multiple locations simultaneously. In the medical bay, where bodies of crew members who succumb to the madness are being stored. In the maintenance tunnels, where a murder-suicide leaves corpses undiscovered long enough for the transformation to complete. In crew quarters, where families who killed each other in fits of marker-induced insanity reanimate as monsters. Within hours, necromorphs are loose throughout the ship, and the crew, unprepared and unaware of what they're facing, die in droves. Alyssa Vincent finds herself thrust into a nightmare scenario. As Chief Security Officer, it falls to her to organize a response to protect the crew and contain the outbreak. But how do you contain an enemy that turns your own dead against you? How do you fight creatures that shrug off gunshots to the chest and keep coming? Vincent and her security team quickly learn that necromorphs do not die like normal organisms. Shooting them in the head or chest, the instinctive targets for any security officer, accomplishes nothing. The creatures have no vital organs in any conventional sense, no centralized nervous system that can be disrupted. The only way to stop them is through dismemberment, severing the limbs that have been transformed into weapons, cutting them apart until they can no longer move. This discovery comes at a terrible cost. Most of Vincent's security team dies learning it, torn apart by creatures they emptied entire magazines into without effect. The survivors fall back, trying to establish secure zones and evacuate civilians to defensible positions, but the necromorphs are everywhere. The ship's layout, designed for efficiency and crew comfort, becomes a labyrinth of death. The creatures use the ventilation systems to move unseen, ambushing survivors from above and below. They are fast, far faster than their twisted forms suggest they should be, and they are intelligent enough to hunt in packs, to lay traps, to cut off escape routes. Captain Matthias, realizing the scale of the disaster, orders an evacuation. But the Ishimura's shuttle bay has already been overrun. The few shuttles that manage to launch are either infected, carrying necromorphs that slaughtered the passengers mid-flight, or are shot down by the increasingly paranoid and marker-influenced bridge crew who fear the infection spreading. The Ishimura is trapped in orbit around Aegis VII, and everyone aboard is trapped with it. Vincent makes the decision that she believes is the only chance for survival. The marker is the source of the signal, the root cause of both the madness and the necromorph outbreak. If they can get it off the ship, or destroy it, maybe the nightmare will end. She assembles a team of survivors, the best and toughest people she can find who are still sane and still alive, and they fight their way to the cargo hold. The journey through the ship is a descent into hell. Corridors are slick with blood, walls covered in strange organic growth that seems to be spreading from the corpses. The necromorphs are not just killing, they are transforming the Ishimura itself, turning it into something alien. When Vincent's team reaches the cargo hold, they find the marker surrounded by a grotesque scene. Bodies, both human and necromorph, are piled around it, and the artifact pulses with increased intensity, as if feeding on the death around it. Vincent orders her team to prepare the marker for transport back to the planet's surface. If they cannot destroy it, maybe they can at least get it off the ship. But the necromorphs seem to sense the threat to their source. The creatures attack in waves, throwing themselves at Vincent's team with suicidal fury. The battle in the cargo hold is brutal and desperate. Vincent and her people fight with everything they have, using mining tools and improvised weapons alongside their firearms, hacking and cutting at the necromorphs, trying to hold the line long enough to complete the transport. One by one, her team falls. Each death is another body for the necromorphs to claim, another ally turned enemy. But Vincent refuses to give up. She has seen too much, lost too much, and she is determined that the marker will not remain on her ship. In the end, Vincent succeeds in sending the marker back to Aegis 7's surface, but the victory is hollow. The damage is done. The Ishimura is a floating graveyard, its corridors filled with necromorphs and the few remaining survivors scattered and isolated throughout the massive vessel. Vincent herself, wounded and exhausted, makes a final log entry, a warning to anyone who might find the ship. She describes what happened, what the marker did, what the necromorphs are, and then, as the creatures close in around her, the recording ends. The USG Ishimura, once the pride of humanity's mining fleet, becomes a derelict ghost ship, drifting in orbit around Aegis 7. Inside, over 1,000 people are dead, their bodies transformed into monsters that wander the darkened corridors, waiting. The colony below is silent, every colonist dead or worse, and the marker, returned to the planet's surface, continues to broadcast its signal into the void, a beacon that will eventually draw others to this place of death. The Ishimura Incident, as it will come to be known, is humanity's first true encounter with the necromorph threat, but it will not be the last. The nightmare has only just begun. The nightmare that began aboard the Ishimura in Downfall is about to reach its full, horrific crescendo. Because in 2508, just days after Alyssa Vincent's escape pod launches into the void, a small repair vessel called the USG Kellyan approaches the now silent mining ship. On board is a 3-person crew and a systems engineer named Isaac Clarke, a man whose technical expertise is about to be tested in ways he could never have imagined, and whose arrival will transform him from an ordinary worker into the sole survivor of one of humanity's darkest hours. Isaac Clarke isn't a soldier. He isn't a security officer or a trained combatant. He's an engineer, a problem solver, someone who fixes broken systems and keeps humanity's vast infrastructure running. He's been dispatched to the Ishimura alongside the Kellyan crew for what should be a routine repair job. The ship sent out a distress signal reporting a communications malfunction. Nothing more. But Isaac has another reason for volunteering for this assignment. His girlfriend, Nicole Brennan, is a medical officer stationed aboard the Ishimura, and he hasn't heard from her in weeks. The official explanation is the communications blackout, but Isaac is worried. He needs to know she's safe. As the Kellyan approaches the Ishimura, something immediately feels wrong. The massive planet cracker, a ship that should be bustling with activity and light, sits dark and silent in orbit above Aegis 7. There's no response to hails, no signs of life, just an ominous quiet that settles over the repair crew like a shroud. The Kellyan's pilot tries to abort the docking procedure, sensing danger, but it's too late. The automated systems pull them in hard, and the small repair ship crashes into the Ishimura's flight deck, sustaining critical damage. They're stranded now, with no choice but to venture into the dead ship and find out what happened. The moment Isaac and the crew step onto the flight deck, they know this isn't a simple communications failure. The deck is abandoned, littered with debris and signs of struggle. Blood stains the walls, equipment lies scattered and broken. And then, before they can even begin to process what they're seeing, the necromorphs attack. These twisted, reanimated corpses, the same creatures that slaughtered the Ishimura's crew in Downfall, descend on the repair team with terrifying speed and violence. The security officers open fire, but they're unprepared for enemies that don't die like normal humans, that keep coming even after taking shots that would drop any living person. In the chaos, the team is separated. Isaac finds himself alone, armed with nothing but his engineering tools and his resource integration gear, or rig, the advanced suit that displays his health and status through a holographic spine mounted on his back. It's a piece of equipment designed for industrial work in hostile environments, not combat, but it's about to become Isaac's lifeline. Around him, the Ishimura groans and creaks, a dying leviathan of metal and shadows. And somewhere in its depths, Nicole might still be alive. Isaac's search for Nicole becomes the driving force behind everything that follows. He receives a brief video message from her, recorded before the communications went down, telling him she's alive and working in the medical deck. It's enough to give him hope, enough to push him forward through the nightmare. But first, he needs to survive, and survival means learning to fight. Isaac quickly discovers that the necromorphs, these creatures born from the marker's influence, don't respond to conventional combat tactics. Shooting them in the head or chest does little. They're already dead, after all, their bodies restructured by the alien signal into something new and terrible. The only way to stop them is through strategic dismemberment, severing their limbs to neutralize their ability to attack. Fortunately, Isaac's engineering tools are perfectly suited to this grim task. His plasma cutter, designed to slice through metal and stone in mining operations, cuts through necromorph flesh and bone with brutal efficiency. His kinesis module, a gravity manipulation device used to move heavy objects, can hurl debris and even severed limbs as weapons. His stasis module, meant for slowing down malfunctioning machinery, can freeze necromorphs in place, giving Isaac precious seconds to line up his shots. These tools, combined with Isaac's problem-solving mind, transform him from prey into something more dangerous. He's still terrified, still just an engineer trying to survive, but he's learning, adapting, becoming efficient at the horrible mathematics of dismemberment. As Isaac ventures deeper into the Ishimura, he maintains contact with the surviving members of his crew. There's Kendra Daniels, a computer specialist who seems unusually knowledgeable about the ship's systems and the marker, and Zach Hammond, a security officer who becomes something of a guide and ally to Isaac. They communicate through video feeds and audio transmissions, directing Isaac to complete various tasks that might get them off the ship. But these tasks are never simple. Every objective requires Isaac to traverse sections of the Ishimura that have become hunting grounds for the necromorphs, to repair systems that have failed catastrophically, to solve engineering puzzles while creatures that used to be human stalk him through the darkness. The ship itself is a character in Isaac's nightmare, a vast industrial cathedral turned into a house of horrors. The medical deck, where Isaac hopes to find Nicole, is filled with the twisted results of Dr. Tyne's failed experiments and the necromorph's feeding habits. The engineering section, which should be familiar territory for someone like Isaac, has become a maze of malfunctioning equipment and environmental hazards. The mining deck, where the Ishimura's planet-cracking operations were controlled, now sits idle above the fractured remains of Aegis 7ths. And everywhere, there are signs of what happened. The logs and messages left behind by the crew in their final hours, echoing the events depicted in Downfall. Isaac begins to piece together the truth about the marker. He learns that it's not just an artifact, but something that broadcasts a signal, something that drove the crew insane and triggered the necromorph outbreak. He discovers that the Church of Unitology, the religion that Nicole had begun to show interest in before her assignment to the Ishimura, is deeply connected to the marker's presence on the ship. And he learns that there are people, like Kendra, who have their own agendas regarding the marker, people who see it as something to be studied and exploited rather than destroyed. But Isaac's focus remains on Nicole. Every message he receives from her, every clue about her location, drives him forward. He fights through the necromorphs, solves the ship's cascading failures, and slowly works his way toward the medical bay where she said she'd be. The visions start during this time, brief flashes of Nicole appearing before him, sometimes helping, sometimes just watching. Isaac, traumatized and exhausted, assumes they're hallucinations brought on by stress and the marker's influence. He doesn't yet understand the full truth. The situation aboard the Ishimura continues to deteriorate. Hammond is killed by necromorphs, leaving Isaac with only Kendra as a contact, and Kendra reveals her true purpose. She's a government agent sent to retrieve the marker for Earth's military. The communications failure, the lack of response from the Ishimura, all of it prompted a covert operation to secure the alien artifact. Isaac and the Kellyan crew were cover, expendable personnel to provide plausible deniability. Kendra doesn't care about the dead crew or the necromorph outbreak. She only wants the marker, and she needs Isaac to help her get it back to the colony on Aegis 7th where it was originally found. Isaac has no choice but to comply. The only way off the Ishimura is to work with Kendra, even if he doesn't trust her. But there's another voice guiding him now. The voice of Dr. Terrence Kine, the chief science officer who appeared briefly in Downfall. Kine, driven mad by the marker but still possessing moments of lucidity, believes that the only way to stop the necromorph outbreak is to return the marker to Aegis 7th. He thinks the marker is the key to everything, that it can somehow shut down the necromorphs if it's placed back where it was found. His reasoning is fractured, influenced by the marker's signal, but he's convinced he's right. Isaac, caught between Kendra's mercenary pragmatism and Kine's desperate faith, continues his grim work. He ventures down to the planet's surface, to the colony that has become another graveyard, another monument to the marker's influence. The colonists below suffered the same fate as the Ishimura's crew, transformed into necromorphs by the marker's signal. Isaac fights through them, retrieves the marker from where Kendra has secured it, and begins the process of transporting it back to the colony's church, a unitology structure where Kine believes it needs to be placed. The physical act of moving the marker is a feat of engineering in itself. The artifact is massive, heavy, and its presence intensifies everything. The necromorphs become more aggressive, more numerous. The visions become stronger. Isaac sees Nicole more frequently now, her image appearing to guide him, to encourage him. He clings to these visions even as part of him knows something is wrong, even as the rational engineer in him recognizes that what he's experiencing isn't real. When Isaac finally places the marker in the church, something happens. The marker activates, or perhaps it was always active, and now its purpose becomes clear. The ground beneath the colony begins to shift and crack. Something enormous stirs beneath Aegis 7's surface, something that has been waiting. This is the convergence that the marker was designed to trigger, the process by which necromorph biomass combines into something far larger and more terrible. But before the full convergence can occur, before whatever lies beneath can fully awaken, Isaac is confronted by the marker's final guardian. The hive mind erupts from beneath the colony, a massive necromorph construct that dwarfs anything Isaac has faced before. It's a mountain of twisted flesh and bone, a collective organism formed from countless bodies, with tentacles thick as trees and a maw that could swallow a shuttle whole. This is what the necromorphs were building toward, the apex of their horrible transformation. The hive mind is both a creature and a structure, both alive and something beyond life, and it's determined to prevent Isaac from interfering with the marker's purpose. The battle that follows is desperate and brutal. Isaac, exhausted and running low on ammunition, uses everything he's learned, every tool at his disposal, to fight the hive mind. He severs its tentacles with his plasma cutter, uses stasis to slow its attacks, and exploits the environmental hazards of the collapsing colony around him. The marker pulses with energy throughout the fight, its influence pushing Isaac to the edge of sanity, filling his mind with visions and voices. But Isaac fights through it, fights through the pain and the fear and the overwhelming horror of what he's facing. When the hive mind finally falls, when its massive form collapses into the churning ground of Aegis 7, Isaac barely has time to catch his breath before the planet itself begins to come apart. The marker's removal, or perhaps its activation, has triggered a catastrophic geological collapse. The colony is tearing itself to pieces, and Isaac needs to escape immediately. He runs for the shuttle platform where Kendra waits, where escape is possible, but Kendra has no intention of taking Isaac with her. She has the marker, or at least the data about it, and Isaac is a loose end, a witness to a government operation that officially never happened. She leaves him to die on the disintegrating planet, taking the shuttle for herself. It seems like the end for Isaac, like he'll be buried in the ruins of Aegis 7 along with all the other victims of the marker's influence. Except Isaac Clarke is an engineer, and engineers solve problems. He finds another way off the planet, commandeering a second shuttle and launching just as the colony collapses completely. He watches through the viewport as Aegis 7 tears itself apart, as the marker and everything connected to it is consumed by the planet's destruction. And then, in a moment of dark irony, he witnesses Kendra's shuttle being crushed by debris, killing her instantly. There's no satisfaction in it, just the cold recognition that everyone involved in this nightmare has paid a price. Isaac sets course back to the Ishimura, the only place left to go. The ship is still in orbit, still full of necromorphs, but it's also the only vessel capable of getting him back to civilization. He docks, makes his way through the familiar horror of the ship's corridors one final time, and reaches the flight deck where this all began. There, he finds a working shuttle, a way home at last. But before he can leave, Isaac finally learns the truth he's been dreading since the moment he stepped aboard the Ishimura. He finds Nicole's final message, the real one, not the edited version he received earlier. In it, Nicole explains that the necromorph outbreak has spread too far, that there's no hope of survival, that she can't bear to become one of those things. And then, as Isaac watches in horror, she takes her own life. Nicole has been dead since before Isaac even arrived. Every vision of her, every message, every moment of hope was a hallucination induced by the marker signal, a cruel trick played on his desperate mind. The revelation breaks something in Isaac. He's fought through hell, survived impossible odds, all for someone who was already gone. As he boards the shuttle and launches away from the Ishimura, as he watches the dead ship recede into the distance, he's alone with his trauma and his grief. The rational part of him knows he survived, knows he escaped, but the emotional cost is almost too much to bear. And then, as Isaac begins to relax, as he allows himself to believe that the nightmare is finally over, Nicole appears one more time. She's standing on the shuttle with him, her form flickering and wrong, her eyes empty. She lunges at him, and Isaac's scream echoes in the confined space as the shuttle continues its journey back to civilization. Even in escape, even in survival, Isaac Clarke remains haunted by the marker's influence, by the visions it burned into his mind. The Ishimura incident is over, but for Isaac, the horror is far from finished. While Isaac Clarke fights for survival aboard the Ishimura, his nightmare began days earlier on the planet below. Dead space. Extraction takes us back to the initial hours of the Aegis 7 outbreak in 2508, revealing the chaos that consumed the colony before the engineering ship even arrived. This is the story of those who witnessed the Red Marker's excavation firsthand, and paid the ultimate price for humanity's curiosity. The perspective shifts to a small group of colonists and security personnel stationed on Aegis 7 itself. Among them is Nathan McNeil, a security officer assigned to protect the mining operation. Alongside him are Gabe Weller, a PSEC officer who would later play a crucial role in events on Titan Station, and Lexine Murdoch, a young colonist caught in circumstances far beyond her control. These individuals represent the last desperate souls trying to escape a colony already lost to the necromorph infection. The outbreak on Aegis 7 spreads with terrifying speed. Within hours of the red marker's removal from the planet's surface, colonists begin experiencing severe psychological distress. The same dementia and hallucinations that plague the Ishimura crew manifest even more intensely among those who spent weeks in close proximity to the artifact during excavation. Workers turn violent, families murder each other, and then, as bodies pile up, the transformation begins. The dead refuse to stay dead. McNeil and his group witness the colony's descent into madness from ground zero. The mining facilities, once bustling with activity and purpose, become charnel houses filled with screaming colonists and the wet, tearing sounds of necromorph transformation. The infection spreads through ventilation systems, through physical contact, through the very air itself. Every fallen colonist becomes another vector for the outbreak, their bodies hijacked by the marker's signal and reshaped into instruments of slaughter. The red marker itself stands at the center of the catastrophe. Even after its removal to the Ishimura, its influence lingers over the colony like a psychic wound. The survivors experience vivid hallucinations, seeing loved ones who guide them toward danger, hearing voices that promise salvation through convergence. The marker does not simply kill, it seduces, manipulates, and corrupts, turning the human mind against itself. Those with stronger mental fortitude resist longer, but resistance only delays the inevitable. As the group fights through the colony's corridors, they encounter the full, horrifying variety of necromorph forms. Slashers, the most common type, were once their friends and coworkers, now transformed into blade-limbed predators. Lurkers, created from the bodies of children, skitter along walls and ceilings, firing bone projectiles from their mutated limbs. The infector, perhaps the most insidious variant, exists solely to spread the infection, stabbing its proboscis into fresh corpses and pumping them full of recombinant tissue that triggers instantaneous transformation. Every corner holds fresh horror. Every room contains another reminder that the people they knew are gone forever, replaced by something that wears their flesh like a costume. The survivors' journey takes them deeper into the colony's infrastructure as they search for any viable escape route. Standard evacuation procedures have completely broken down. Ships that attempted to flee were either destroyed by panicking colonists fighting for seats or became flying tombs when infected individuals transformed mid-flight. The colony's communication systems broadcast nothing but screams and the marker's hymn, that strange harmonic frequency that seems to resonate in the bones of everyone who hears it. Isolation becomes total. Help is not coming. Escape is the only option. Gabe Weller emerges as a natural leader during the crisis. His security training and combat experience prove invaluable as the group navigates through necromorph-infested corridors. But even Weller, hardened by years of service, struggles against the psychological assault of the marker's influence. He sees his wife in the shadows, calling to him, begging him to join her in unity. He hears promises of peace, of an end to suffering, if only he would stop fighting and accept convergence. The marker does not merely attack the body, it wages war on hope itself, eroding the will to survive one hallucination at a time. Lexine Murdoch becomes a focal point for the group's survival efforts. There is something different about her, something that makes her valuable beyond her role as a colonist. The Church of Unitology, whose members are scattered throughout the colony, show unusual interest in her survival. Unitologist agents appear at critical moments, sometimes helping, sometimes hindering, always watching. Their agenda remains opaque, but their connection to the marker and its purpose becomes increasingly apparent. Lexine carries a secret, one that ties directly into the marker's true function and the Unitologist's ultimate goal. The group's desperate flight takes them through every section of the doomed colony. They traverse the mining tunnels where the red marker was first discovered, walls still bearing the strange symbols that workers reported seeing in their dreams weeks before excavation began. They fight through residential blocks where families barricaded themselves in apartments, only to transform and slaughter each other in confined spaces. They navigate industrial sectors where mining equipment, designed to crack open asteroids, now serves as improvised weapons against creatures that should not exist. Each location tells a story of hope corrupted, of human ingenuity turned towards survival against an enemy that defies natural law. The necromorphs themselves evolve as the outbreak progresses. New forms emerge, each more specialized and deadly than the last. The Brute, a massive armored creature formed from multiple corpses fused together, charges through corridors with unstoppable momentum. The Pregnant, a grotesque variant with a swollen abdomen, releases swarms of smaller necromorphs when killed, turning every victory into a new threat. The Infection demonstrates horrifying adaptability, reshaping human tissue to exploit every tactical advantage. The marker's signal does not create random mutations, it engineers weapons, each form optimized for hunting, killing, and spreading the infection further. As the survivors near potential escape routes, they begin to understand the true scope of the catastrophe. The Ishimura, visible in orbit above, has gone dark. No communications, no evacuation shuttles. The engineering ship that was supposed to be their salvation has become another tomb. The colony's remaining shuttles represent the only chance for escape, but reaching them requires traversing the most heavily infested sections of the facility. Every step forward costs lives. Every door opened reveals fresh nightmares. The group that began with dozens dwindles to a handful. The psychological toll mounts alongside the physical danger. Survivors turn on each other, paranoia and marker-induced dementia eroding trust. Some attempt to sabotage escape efforts, convinced that convergence represents salvation rather than annihilation. Others simply break under the strain, catatonic or suicidal, unable to process the horror surrounding them. McNeil and Weller struggle to maintain group cohesion, but leadership means little when the enemy attacks from within the mind itself. The marker does not need necromorphs to kill. Madness serves just as well. The red marker's influence manifests in increasingly direct ways. Survivors experience shared hallucinations, seeing the same figures, hearing the same voices. The marker communicates not through language but through emotion and imagery, flooding minds with visions of unity, of individual consciousness dissolving into something greater. It shows them convergence, the final stage of the marker's purpose. When sufficient biomass has been accumulated and transformed, the visions are beautiful and terrible, promising transcendence through the complete dissolution of self. Some find the prospect comforting. Others recognize it for what it truly is. Extinction wearing the mask of evolution. Technical logs and scattered data pads reveal fragments of the colony's final days. Scientists who studied the marker recorded strange phenomena, localized gravity fluctuations, electromagnetic anomalies, and that persistent signal broadcasting on frequencies that should not affect biological tissue, but somehow do. The marker is not simply an artifact. It is a machine, a device with specific function and purpose. But its creators and their intentions remain frustratingly unclear. Was it built as a weapon? A test? A beacon? The answers lie buried in the marker's alien architecture, in symbols that human minds struggle to comprehend without descending into madness. The survivors finally reach a functional shuttle in the colony's departure bay. The hangar is a scene of absolute carnage, filled with the remains of colonists who fought and died for seats on ships that never launched. Necromorphs swarm the area, drawn by the concentration of potential victims. The final push to the shuttle becomes a desperate last stand, survivors burning through their remaining ammunition and improvised weapons to carve a path through the horde. Every second counts. Every shot must find its mark. There is no margin for error, no second chances. As the shuttle powers up, the survivors witness Aegis VII's final moments. The planet itself, already unstable from extensive mining operations, begins to break apart. The Ishimura's gravity tethers, designed to hold planetary fragments in place during mining, have failed catastrophically. Massive chunks of the planet's crust tear free, colliding with each other in a slow-motion apocalypse. The colony, built on the surface, disintegrates along with the world beneath it. Everything humanity built on Aegis VII, every structure, every dream of prosperity, crumbles into the void. The destruction is not accidental. Data recovered during the escape reveals that the Ishimura's engines were deliberately overloaded, creating a gravity well that tears the planet apart. Someone aboard the ship, in a final act of desperate heroism or calculated containment, chose to destroy Aegis VII rather than let the infection spread. The decision annihilates any hope of rescue for those still on the surface, but it also prevents the necromorphs from using the colony as a staging ground. Thousands die to save millions. The mathematics of catastrophe are coldly pragmatic. The shuttle clears the planet's fragmenting atmosphere just as the largest pieces collide. The impact generates a shockwave that nearly destroys the small craft, but it survives, limping toward open space. Behind them, Aegis VII ceases to exist as a coherent body, reduced to a field of debris and dust. The red marker, presumably still aboard the Ishimura, has claimed an entire world. The survivors carry with them the knowledge of what happened, the truth about the marker and the necromorph infection. But they also carry the psychological scars, the lingering influence of the artifact that will haunt them for the rest of their lives. The shuttle's destination becomes a matter of desperate calculation. The Ishimura cannot be reached, its communications dark and its orbit erratic. Other CEC ships in the system have either fled or gone silent. The survivors set course for the nearest functioning facility, hoping to find help, quarantine, and answers. But they also carry the infection with them, not in their bodies but in their minds. The marker's signal has imprinted itself on their consciousness, a psychic payload that will activate under the right conditions. They are not just survivors, they are carriers, vectors for the marker's influence to spread beyond Aegis VII. Extraction reveals the human cost of the necromorph outbreak in intimate, personal terms. These are not anonymous colonists dying in statistics. They are individuals with names, histories, and relationships, all consumed by an infection they never understood and could not fight. Their struggle highlights the marker's true horror, not just its ability to transform flesh, but its capacity to corrupt meaning itself. It turns love into a weapon, hope into a trap, and survival into a form of damnation. Those who escape Aegis VII carry the knowledge that death might have been the kinder fate. The horrors aboard the USG Ishimura and the mining colony on Aegis VII might have served as a definitive warning about the dangers of marker technology, but EarthGov had other plans. Just 1 year after the Ishimura incident in 2508, a new team would be sent to investigate what remained of both the ship and the planet it had been orbiting. What they would find and what they would unleash would prove that humanity's obsession with the markers was far from over. The USG O'Bannon, a research and recovery vessel, arrives at the coordinates where Aegis VII once existed. The planet itself is gone, completely destroyed during the cataclysmic events that concluded Isaac Clarke's nightmare aboard the Ishimura. What remains is a debris field, scattered fragments of rock and metal drifting through space like a graveyard. Among this wreckage float pieces of the Ishimura itself, the once mighty planet cracker now broken and lifeless. The O'Bannon's mission is straightforward on paper: investigate the site, recover any useful data or materials, and determine exactly what happened here. But like so many missions involving marker technology, the official briefing doesn't tell the full story. The crew of the O'Bannon is a mix of scientists, engineers, and security personnel, each bringing their own expertise and, crucially, their own psychological vulnerabilities to the mission. Among them are several key figures whose testimonies will later prove vital to understanding the events that unfold. There is Nolan Strauss, a scientist who specializes in xenobiology and who displays an almost immediate fascination with any marker-related materials they encounter. There is Isabel Cho, the chief science officer who approaches the mission with professional detachment, at least initially. There is Alejandro Borgas, a security officer who views the entire operation with suspicion from the start. And there is Noah Pauling, another member of the team whose role in the unfolding disaster will become increasingly significant as events progress. As the O'Bannon begins its investigation of the debris field, the team quickly locates fragments of the red marker, the reverse-engineered copy that had been stored aboard the Ishimura and later brought down to Aegis 7th. These fragments, pieces of the alien artifact that started the entire catastrophe, are still intact despite the planet's destruction. The scientific team, operating under orders from EarthGov, begins the process of recovering these fragments and bringing them aboard the O'Bannon for study. It is a decision that seals the fate of nearly everyone on the ship. You have to understand that even fragments of a marker retain the properties that make the complete artifact so dangerous. The electromagnetic signal that markers emit, the signal that transmits the genetic instructions for necromorph transformation and manipulates the minds of nearby humans, does not require a complete marker to function. Even pieces of the structure continue to broadcast, continue to influence, continue to corrupt. The scientists aboard the O'Bannon are aware of the marker's effects in theory, but theory and experience are vastly different things. They take precautions, certainly. The fragments are stored in containment, monitored constantly, studied from behind protective barriers. But these precautions are built on incomplete understanding. EarthGov's briefings have not told them everything. Perhaps EarthGov itself does not know everything. The effects begin subtly. Members of the crew report headaches, difficulty sleeping, vivid dreams. Some experience auditory hallucinations, hearing voices or sounds that have no source. Others see things, fleeting images at the edges of their vision. The medical officer attributes these symptoms to stress, to the psychological weight of working at a disaster site where thousands died. It is a reasonable explanation, and it is completely wrong. What the crew is experiencing is the marker signal working on their minds, exploiting their individual psychological weaknesses, searching for the right pressure points to create the chaos it needs. Nolan Strauss becomes increasingly obsessed with the marker fragments. He spends hours studying them, analyzing their structure, trying to understand the mathematical and geometric principles encoded in their surface. The marker is not just an object, he insists to his colleagues. It is a message, a blueprint, a key to understanding something far greater than human science has yet achieved. His colleagues grow concerned about his fixation, but Strauss is a brilliant scientist, and brilliance often comes with eccentricity. They do not yet recognize that what they are witnessing is not eccentricity, but the early stages of marker-induced psychosis. The true disaster begins when the O'Bannon's crew locates something unexpected in the debris field. Among the wreckage, they find bodies, corpses from the Ishimura that have been floating in space since the ship's destruction. Standard protocol would be to leave them, to mark their location for a proper recovery team. But the mission parameters include recovering any and all materials related to the incident for study, and bodies are materials. They are evidence. Several corpses are brought aboard the O'Bannon and taken to the medical bay for examination. What the crew does not know, what they cannot know without having experienced a necromorph outbreak firsthand, is that the necromorph transformation process can remain dormant in dead tissue under the right conditions. The vacuum of space has preserved these bodies, and with them, it has preserved the genetic restructuring that the marker signal initiated. The bodies are not just corpses. They are time bombs waiting for the right trigger. That trigger comes when the bodies are brought into proximity with the marker fragments. The signal intensifies. The dormant necromorph tissue activates. In the sterile environment of the medical bay, the bodies begin to change. Limbs twist and elongate. Bone bursts through flesh to form blades and spikes. What were once human corpses become slashers, the most common and deadly form of necromorph, and they are very much alive. The outbreak spreads with horrifying speed. The necromorphs kill crew members, and those corpses become new necromorphs, and those necromorphs kill more crew members in an exponential cascade of death and transformation. The security team responds, but they are unprepared for enemies like this. You cannot stop a necromorph with a shot to the chest or head. The creatures have no vital organs in the traditional sense, no central nervous system to disrupt. Only dismemberment works, severing the limbs that have been transformed into weapons, and even the security personnel who figure this out quickly find themselves overwhelmed by sheer numbers. The O'Bannon descends into chaos. The ship's corridors become hunting grounds. The The crew fragments into small groups of survivors, each trying desperately to reach escape pods or secure locations. Some barricade themselves in storage rooms or laboratories. Others attempt to fight their way to the hangar bay. The marker signal grows stronger, feeding on the death and terror. And those crew members still alive begin to experience more severe psychological effects. Some turn violent, attacking their fellow survivors. Others catatonic, paralyzed by visions only they can see. The line between the external threat of the necromorphs and the internal threat of marker induced madness blurs until they become indistinguishable. Isabel Cho, the chief science officer, attempts to organize a coherent response. She recognizes that the marker fragments are somehow connected to the outbreak, that their presence is amplifying whatever is happening to the crew. She proposes jettisoning the fragments into space, removing them from the ship entirely, but it is too late for such measures. The necromorph infestation has spread too far, and more critically, not everyone agrees that destroying the marker fragments is the right course of action. Nolan Strauss, now deeply under the marker's influence, views the fragments as precious, irreplaceable. He sabotages attempts to dispose of them, insisting that the knowledge they contain is worth any price. Alejandro Borges, the security officer, takes a more direct approach. He recognizes that some members of the crew have become liabilities, that the marker's influence has made them dangerous to the survivors. He makes hard decisions, brutal decisions, killing crew members who have become too unstable or who threaten the group's survival. Whether these actions are justified or whether Borges himself has been affected by the marker signal, driven to violence by its influence, becomes a question with no clear answer. In the nightmare environment of the Obannon, morality becomes fluid, and survival becomes the only imperative. The survivors' numbers dwindle. One by one, crew members fall to the necromorphs or to each other. The ship itself becomes a tomb, its corridors filled with bodies and the creatures those bodies have become. Emergency systems fail, life support becomes unreliable. The Obannon is dying, and most of its crew is already dead. In the final hours of the outbreak, a small group of survivors manages to send a distress signal. They provide their coordinates, describe the situation in desperate fragmentary transmissions, and wait for rescue or death, whichever comes first. What arrives is an EarthGov ship, a military vessel that has been monitoring the Obannon's mission from a distance. The government ship does not arrive to rescue the crew out of humanitarian concern. It arrives to contain the situation, to recover the marker fragments, and to ensure that what happened aboard the Obannon does not become public knowledge. The EarthGov team boards the Obannon and finds a scene of almost total devastation. The ship is a charnel house filled with bodies and necromorphs, and the few survivors who have somehow endured. The military personnel efficiently eliminate the remaining necromorphs, secure the marker fragments, and take the survivors into custody. This is not a rescue. This is damage control. The survivors, perhaps 4 or 5 individuals out of a crew of dozens, are transported to a secure EarthGov facility. There, they are separated and interrogated. Each survivor is placed in an isolated room and questioned extensively about what happened aboard the Obannon. The interrogations are not gentle. EarthGov needs to know exactly what occurred, what the survivors saw, what they learned about the markers and the necromorphs. But more than that, EarthGov needs to assess whether these survivors pose a security risk, whether they know too much, whether they can be trusted to remain silent about what they experienced. The interrogation sequences reveal the full scope of the disaster through the fragmented testimonies of the survivors. Each person remembers events differently, colored by their own experiences and by the psychological trauma they endured. Isabel Cho provides clinical, detailed descriptions of the outbreak's progression, analyzing it even in retrospect as a scientist would. Alejandro Borges offers a security perspective, focusing on the tactical failures and the impossible nature of fighting necromorphs without proper training or equipment. Nolan Strauss, still partially under the marker's influence, speaks in half-coherent rambles about the beauty of the marker's design, about the knowledge it contains, about the transformation it promises. His interrogators take careful notes. Through these testimonies, EarthGov learns several critical pieces of information. They learn that even fragments of a marker are dangerous, that the artifact's effects do not require physical completeness. They learn that necromorph tissue can remain viable even after extended exposure to vacuum, that the transformation process is more resilient than previously understood. They learn that the psychological effects of marker exposure can turn survivors against each other as effectively as any necromorph. And perhaps most importantly, they learn that their understanding of marker technology is still incomplete, that there are aspects of these artifacts that remain mysterious and deadly. But despite learning about these dangers, despite hearing firsthand testimony about the horrors that markers unleash, EarthGov does not abandon its marker research program. If anything, the Obannon incident reinforces their commitment to understanding and controlling this technology. The potential benefits, the promise of unlimited energy, and the other applications that marker technology might offer are too valuable to abandon simply because of the risks. The survivors' warnings fall on ears that hear but choose not to listen. The fate of the Obannon survivors varies. Some are detained indefinitely, held in secure facilities where they can be monitored and prevented from sharing what they know. Others are released but placed under strict surveillance, their lives constrained by non-disclosure agreements backed by the full power of Earth's government. Nolan Strauss, whose expertise and marker exposure make him uniquely valuable, is transferred to a special facility where his knowledge can be exploited. His descent into marker-induced madness will continue, and EarthGov will watch and document every stage of it. The Obannon itself is quietly disposed of, either destroyed or hidden away in some classified location. Official records list the ship as lost due to a catastrophic systems failure, a tragic accident with no survivors. The truth, the reality of what happened when humanity once again brought marker fragments into close proximity with the living, remains classified. The families of the crew are told lies. The public never learns what really occurred, and the marker research continues. 3 years pass. 3 years of silence, of secrets buried deep within EarthGov's classified archives. While the galaxy at large remains blissfully ignorant of the true horror that unfolded aboard the Ishimura, one man carries the weight of that nightmare in every waking moment and every tortured dream. In 2511, Isaac Clarke opens his eyes once more, and the nightmare is far from over. Isaac awakens not in a hospital, not in the safety of quarantine, but strapped to a chair in a padded cell aboard the Sprawl, a massive civilian space station orbiting the ringed giant Saturn. The Sprawl is no ordinary outpost. It's a monument to human ambition and excess, a city in space housing hundreds of thousands of residents across multiple districts. Shopping centers, residential blocks, schools, churches, all the trappings of terrestrial life transplanted into the cold vacuum. The station was built into and around the remains of Titan Station, originally a mining facility on Saturn's moon Titan, but expanded over decades into a sprawling metropolis that earned its nickname Honestly. It represents everything humanity has achieved in its conquest of the solar system, a shining example of civilization's reach into the outer planets. But Isaac remembers none of his arrival here. The last 3 years exist only as fragments, shattered pieces of memory that refuse to coalesce into anything coherent. What he does remember are the visions, the hallucinations, the voice of Nicole Brennan, his dead girlfriend, speaking to him in moments both waking and sleeping. The marker's influence didn't end when he escaped the Ishimura. If anything, it burrowed deeper into his mind, carving symbols and equations into his very consciousness. The red marker he encountered, that alien artifact humanity foolishly believed it could control, left its mark on him in ways both literal and psychological. EarthGov knows this. They've known it from the moment Isaac was recovered from the Ishimura's escape pod. Rather than treat him as a survivor deserving of care and counseling, they recognized him for what he'd become, a valuable resource. You see, Isaac's exposure to the marker was unique in both duration and intensity. While others went mad and died or transformed into necromorphs, Isaac survived with his sanity relatively intact, even as the marker's blueprint burned itself into his neural pathways. EarthGov scientists, still pursuing their marker research despite the Aegis 7 catastrophe, saw in Isaac a living key to unlocking the artifact's secrets. They brought him to the Sprawl not as a patient, but as a test subject. For 3 years, Isaac has been held in the psychiatric wing of the Sprawl's medical facilities, subjected to treatments that blur the line between therapy and interrogation. Doctors probe his memories of the Ishimura, extract the marker symbols from his subconscious, all while officially diagnosing him with severe dementia and psychosis. It's a convenient cover. A man suffering from marker-induced madness can be held indefinitely, studied, his rights suspended in the name of public safety and scientific progress. The irony is that the treatments themselves, the constant exposure to marker imagery and forced recollection, only deepen the artifact's hold on his mind. But Isaac is not the only one interested in the Sprawl's secrets. The Church of Unitology, that faith born from Michael Allman's teachings and twisted by decades of corporate and political manipulation, has grown in power and influence. To the Unitologists, the markers are not weapons or power sources, but sacred artifacts, instruments of transformation that will elevate humanity to a higher plane of existence. They believe in convergence, the ultimate union of all life through the marker's power, though few truly understand what that transformation entails. The Church has infiltrated every level of society, including EarthGov itself, and they've known about the Sprawl's secret for some time. Hidden deep within the station, in a research facility known as the Marker Lab, EarthGov scientists have done the unthinkable. They've built another marker. Using data extracted from Isaac's mind, combined with research from Aegis 7 and other classified projects, they've constructed a red marker, a replica of the alien artifact. They call it Site 12, and it's been active for months, its field extending throughout sections of the station. The official story is that it's a controlled experiment, that they've learned from past mistakes, that this time they can harness the marker's power without triggering the catastrophic transformation into necromorphs. They're wrong. They've always been wrong. The outbreak begins not with a bang, but with a whisper, a creeping infection that spreads through the station's lower levels before anyone in authority realizes what's happening. Bodies in the morgue twitch and reform. Patients in hospitals convulse and transform. The markers signal that inaudible frequency that rewrites dead tissue at the cellular level pulses through the Sprawl's corridors, and the dead refuse to stay dead. By the time the first alarms sound, by the time security forces mobilize, entire sections have already fallen. The necromorphs, those horrific recombinations of human corpses, pour through residential districts and commercial zones. Families die in their homes. Shoppers become prey in stores that minutes before sold them everyday goods. The sprawl, that triumph of human engineering, becomes a hunting ground. Isaac's cell door opens not as an act of mercy, but as a consequence of chaos. A unitologist operative, a woman named Diana Le Guin, has been working to extract him for the church's own purposes. As the outbreak spreads and systems fail, she seizes her opportunity. But Isaac awakens confused, disoriented, still trapped in the fog of his fractured mind. The visions of Nicole intensify, her voice guiding him, taunting him, leading him through corridors filled with the dead and the dying. He doesn't know if she's real, if she's a hallucination, or if she's something worse, a manifestation of the marker's influence wearing the face of the woman he loved. The Sprawl's population, hundreds of thousands strong, has nowhere to run. This isn't a ship where you can seal off sections and hope for rescue. This is their home, their entire world, and it's being consumed from within. Evacuation shuttles launch in a panic, some making it away clean, others torn apart by necromorphs that have already infiltrated the docking bays. Security Director Hans Tiedemann, the man ultimately responsible for the Marker project, watches his station fall apart in real time. He's a company man, a believer in EarthGov's vision, and he's willing to do whatever it takes to contain the situation, even if that means sacrificing thousands of lives. To Tiedemann, Isaac represents both a threat and a potential solution. If Isaac can be recaptured, if the marker data in his head can be fully extracted, perhaps something can be salvaged from this disaster. Isaac fights his way through the chaos with a desperate practiced efficiency. The 3 years since the Ishimura haven't erased his ability to survive. If anything, his engineering skills and his brutal education in necromorph anatomy make him uniquely suited to this nightmare. He improvises weapons from mining tools and construction equipment, the Sprawl's industrial districts providing an arsenal of plasma cutters, line guns, and contact beams. Every step forward is a battle, every room a potential tomb. The necromorphs here are the same varieties he encountered before, slashers with their blade-like arms, leapers that pounce from the darkness, pregnants that birth swarms of smaller creatures, but the environment is different. The Ishimura was industrial, utilitarian. The Sprawl is civilian. Isaac fights through children's daycares where tiny necromorphs, transformed from the station's youngest residents, crawl and shriek. He battles through a unitologist church where worshippers welcome their transformation, their bodies arranged in grotesque tableaus of religious ecstasy. He's not alone in his struggle. Ellie Langford, a systems engineer working on the Sprawl, becomes an unlikely ally. Ellie is tough, resourceful, and refreshingly skeptical of both EarthGov's authority and Isaac's initial paranoia. She guides him through the station systems, hacking doors and rerouting power while Isaac handles the physical threats. Their relationship begins with mutual suspicion but evolves into something more, a partnership forged in survival. Ellie represents something Isaac thought he'd lost, a connection to another human being that isn't tainted by death or hallucination. She's real, she's alive, and she's determined to escape this hell. Dana, the unitologist operative, continues to contact Isaac, promising safety and answers if he'll just make his way to her location. She speaks of the church's protection, of understanding what he's been through, of the sacred nature of his connection to the marker. Isaac, desperate and confused, follows her instructions even as doubt gnaws at him. When he finally reaches her, when he sees the unitologist symbols and the armed guards waiting, the truth becomes clear. The church doesn't want to save him. They want to deliver him to the marker, to use him to accelerate convergence. Dana speaks of his role in humanity's transformation, of the gift he carries in his mind, right up until a gunshot cuts her off. Tiedemann's forces have caught up, and they want Isaac for their own purposes. The station continues to deteriorate. The necromorph infection has reached critical mass, spreading faster than it can be contained. Tiedemann makes the cold calculation that the Sprawl itself might need to be sacrificed, but not before the marker data is secured. He sends teams after Isaac, soldiers who are just as likely to be killed by necromorphs as to succeed in their mission. The director's voice echoes through public address systems, alternating between ordering Isaac's capture and trying to maintain some semblance of control over a population that's being slaughtered by the thousands. Isaac's journey takes him deeper into the station's secrets, into the research labs where the marker sits in its containment chamber, pulsing with that familiar, terrible red glow. Along the way, he encounters other survivors, though few last long. Some have been driven mad by the marker's signal, their minds unable to process its influence. Others fall to necromorphs despite Isaac's best efforts to protect them. The Sprawl becomes a gallery of human suffering, each district telling its own story of how the outbreak consumed it. The residential sectors where families barricaded themselves in apartments, buying minutes of life before the doors gave way. The transportation hub where crowds stampeded, crushing each other in panic before the necromorphs even arrived. the elementary school, its halls decorated with children's artwork, now painted with very different colors. Through it all, Nicole's presence intensifies. She appears around corners, her voice whispering in Isaac's ear, sometimes comforting, sometimes accusing. The visions force Isaac to confront what he's been running from for 3 years. Nicole is dead. She died on the Ishimura before Isaac ever arrived. The woman he's been seeing, the presence that's been guiding and tormenting him, is a construct, a product of the marker's influence combined with his own guilt and grief. The marker uses the dead as a weapon, not just physically through necromorph transformation, but psychologically, turning loss and trauma into tools of manipulation. Ellie becomes Isaac's anchor to reality. When the visions threaten to overwhelm him, when he can't tell what's real anymore, she's there with a sharp comment or a practical problem that needs solving. Their bond deepens even as the situation becomes more desperate. In one harrowing moment, a necromorph attack leaves Ellie injured, and Isaac must perform emergency medical procedures with improvised tools while fighting off creatures that want to add them both to the infection. It's intimate and horrific, a moment of vulnerability in the midst of constant violence. The path to the marker becomes clear. Isaac realizes that the only way to stop the outbreak, to end the signal that's creating new necromorphs and driving survivors mad, is to destroy the artifact itself. Tiedemann, monitoring Isaac's progress, understands this too and becomes increasingly desperate to stop him. The marker represents years of research, billions of credits in investment, and potentially the key to humanity's energy crisis. To destroy it is to destroy EarthGov's grand vision, to admit that the entire marker program has been a catastrophic failure from the beginning. Isaac fights his way to Site 12, to the marker lab deep in the station's core. The facility is a testament to human hubris, a clean, sterile environment where scientists believed they could safely study and replicate an artifact they never truly understood. The marker itself towers in its chamber, massive and imposing, its surface covered in those intricate symbols that Isaac knows all too well. He can feel its pull, the way it tries to sink hooks into his mind, to use the blueprint it carved into his consciousness 3 years ago. The final confrontation is as much internal as external. Tiedemann arrives, armed and determined to preserve his life's work even as it destroys everything around him. Nicole, or the thing wearing her face, makes one last attempt to break Isaac's will, to convince him that destruction is futile, that convergence is inevitable. But Isaac has spent 3 years trapped in his own mind, 3 years fighting the marker's influence, and he's learned something crucial. The marker's power comes from acceptance, from surrender. It feeds on belief, whether that's the Unitologist's religious fervor or the scientist's conviction that they can control it. To defeat it, Isaac must reject it completely, must accept that Nicole is gone and that the visions are lies. He destroys the marker. Using the station's own systems, Isaac overloads the containment field and tears the artifact apart. The explosion is catastrophic, triggering a chain reaction that will consume Site 12 and potentially large sections of the Sprawl. As the marker disintegrates, the necromorph infection loses its source. The creatures don't disappear, but no new ones will be created. The dead, finally, can stay dead. Isaac and Ellie race for the last evacuation shuttle, fighting through collapsing corridors and the remaining necromorphs. Tiedemann, in his final moments, tries to stop them, but he's just a man with a gun, and Isaac has survived far worse. They reach the shuttle, launch into the black, and watch as sections of the Sprawl tear themselves apart behind them. Thousands are dead, an entire city in space reduced to a tomb, but they're alive. Isaac is alive. Truly alive, perhaps for the first time since the Ishimura. As they drift in the shuttle, waiting for rescue, Isaac finally allows himself to believe that it might be over. The visions have stopped. Nicole's voice is silent. The marker's influence, burned into his brain for 3 years, has finally released its grip. He looks at Ellie, this woman who fought beside him and refused to let him surrender to madness. And for the first time in years, he feels something other than terror and guilt. He feels hope. But even as they escape, even as the Sprawl becomes another classified disaster for EarthGov to cover up, the truth remains. The markers are still out there. The research continues. And Isaac Clarke, the engineer who twice survived what should have been impossible, carries knowledge that powerful people will kill to possess or to bury. 3 years after the Sprawl incident in 2514, Isaac Clarke believed he had finally found peace. Living in relative anonymity on the moon, he had spent those years trying to rebuild some semblance of a normal life, far from markers and necromorphs. But the universe, it seemed, was not finished with him yet. When Captain Robert Norton and Sergeant John Carver arrived at his doorstep with an urgent mission from EarthGov, Isaac initially refused. He had seen enough horror, lost enough people, and paid enough of a price for humanity's mistakes. But Norton revealed something that changed everything. Ellie Langford, Isaac's former partner, had gone missing while leading an expedition to find the source of the markers. For Ellie, Isaac would go anywhere, face anything. He agreed to join the mission. The destination was Tau Volantis, a remote ice planet on the outer edges of colonized space. According to fragments of intelligence gathered by Ellie's team before they disappeared, Tau Volantis was believed to be the homeworld of the Markers, the place where humanity might finally learn the truth about these alien artifacts, and, more importantly, how to stop them. The journey itself was fraught with tension. Norden, who had developed feelings for Ellie during Isaac's absence, viewed the engineer with barely concealed resentment. Carver, meanwhile, carried his own demons, haunted by the loss of his family to a necromorph outbreak. The small team of soldiers and specialists that accompanied them understood the stakes. With Earth and her colonies facing increasing marker-related incidents and necromorph outbreaks, this mission represented humanity's last real hope for survival. Upon arriving in the Tau Volantis system, the team immediately encountered resistance. Unitologist forces, led by the fanatic Jacob Danique, had also tracked Ellie's expedition to the planet. Danique, you may recall, had orchestrated the marker activation on Titan Station and now commanded a significant militant faction within the Church of Unitology. His goal remained unchanged, to bring about convergence across all human worlds, believing it to be the prophesied ascension. The space battle that erupted forced Isaac's ship to crash land on Tau Volantis, scattering the team across the frozen wasteland. In the chaos, Isaac learned that Ellie had survived and was somewhere on the planet's surface, still searching for answers about the markers. Tau Volantis itself was a world of contradictions and mysteries. Though now a frozen ball of ice with surface temperatures lethal to unprotected humans, evidence suggested it had once been temperate, possibly even hospitable to life. More intriguing still were the ruins. Scattered across the planet were the remains of an advanced alien civilization, a species that had clearly achieved a level of technology rivaling or exceeding humanity's own. These aliens, whom researchers dubbed the Tau Volantis aliens, had left behind massive structures, sophisticated machinery, and countless artifacts. As Isaac fought through both Unitologist soldiers and the inevitable necromorph hordes that seemed to infest every corner of the planet, he began piecing together the story of what had happened here 200 million years ago. The Tau Volantis aliens had encountered the markers just as humanity had. They had studied them, experimented with them, and eventually learned the terrible truth that humanity was only now beginning to understand. The markers were not gifts, not tools for advancement, and certainly not divine artifacts promising transcendence. They were a trap, a galaxy-spanning reproductive mechanism for entities beyond human comprehension. Through recovered alien data and the translations provided by his team's specialists, Isaac learned about the Brethren Moons, massive living organisms the size of planets, each one a gestalt consciousness formed from the biomass of entire civilizations. The markers, it turned out, were the moon's way of seeding new worlds, preparing them for harvest. The mechanism was elegant in its horror. A marker would be discovered or created, its signal would drive intelligent beings to madness, while simultaneously providing them with the knowledge to replicate it. As markers spread across a civilization, they would trigger necromorph outbreaks, converting all available biomass into the raw material needed for convergence. When enough biomass had been gathered and converted, when the conditions were precisely right, convergence would occur. All the necromorphs, all the transformed flesh and bone, would unite into a single massive organism. This was not death or transcendence as the Unitologists believed. It was birth. Each convergence event created a new Brethren Moon, a new member of an ancient species that fed on the life force and collective consciousness of entire worlds. The Tau Volantis aliens had discovered this truth before their own convergence could complete. In a desperate race against time, they had constructed a massive machine, a device designed to freeze their entire planet and halt the convergence process before the nascent Brethren Moon could fully form. The plan had worked, after a fashion. Tau Volantis had been flash frozen, its atmosphere locked in ice, its convergence halted mid-process. The Brethren Moon that had been forming remained trapped beneath the ice, dormant but not dead, waiting for the day when the planet might thaw and the process could resume. The Tau Volantis aliens themselves had not survived their desperate gambit. Whether they had perished in the freezing of their world or had simply died out in the aftermath, their civilization was gone, leaving only ruins and warnings for any species that might follow in their footsteps. As Isaac reunited with Ellie and the survivors of her expedition, the full scope of the threat became clear. The Brethren Moons were not a distant hypothetical danger. They were real, they were aware, and they were waiting. Earth itself, with its multiple markers and billions of potential victims, was on the verge of convergence. The moons could communicate across vast distances, their psychic influence reaching out through the marker network to drive humanity toward its doom. Every marker humanity had ever built, every outbreak that had been triggered, every death that had occurred, all of it had been orchestrated to prepare Earth for harvest. The Unitologists, in their blind faith, were serving as the moon's unwitting agents, actively working to bring about the extinction of their own species. Jacob Danique and his forces had also uncovered much of this truth, but their interpretation remained twisted by religious fervor. Rather than recoiling in horror at the revelation of the Brethren Moons, Danique embraced them as gods, as the divine beings who would elevate humanity through convergence. His forces raced to reactivate the markers across human space, to accelerate the process and bring about what he saw as humanity's glorious transformation. On Tau Volantis, Danique sought to destroy the machine that kept the planet frozen, believing that releasing the trapped Brethren moon would hasten the convergence on Earth and throughout the colonies. The conflict that erupted was fought on multiple fronts simultaneously. Isaac and his team battled through Unitologist soldiers, ancient alien facilities, and hordes of necromorphs that had been frozen for millions of years, but were now thawing and reanimating in the warming caused by the human presence. The personal tensions within the group reached a breaking point when Norton, driven by jealousy and the subtle psychic influence of the markers, attempted to betray Isaac. The confrontation ended in Norton's death, a tragedy that highlighted how even the strongest-willed individuals could be corrupted by the markers' influence. Carver, fighting his own battles against hallucinations and visions of his dead family, struggled to maintain his sanity long enough to complete the mission. Deep within the alien ruins, Isaac discovered the control center for the machine. The device was a marvel of alien engineering, a planet-scale mechanism capable of manipulating Tau Volantis' entire climate and atmospheric composition. The aliens had left detailed instructions, seemingly hoping that if another species ever faced the same threat, they might learn from Tau Volantis' example. But there was a complication. Danique had already reached the machine and had begun the process of shutting it down. As the device powered off, the planet began to thaw. The ice that had held the Brethren moon in stasis for 200 million years started to melt. Beneath the surface, the massive creature stirred, its psychic presence flooding the planet with overwhelming force. Isaac fought his way to Danique, but he was too late to prevent the machine's deactivation. In the confrontation that followed, Danique was killed, but the damage had been done. The Brethren moon was awakening, and with it, convergence events were accelerating across human space. Isaac could feel its presence, a vast and alien intelligence that viewed humanity not as people but as food, as raw material to create more of its kind. The moon's psychic voice was overwhelming, a chorus of billions of absorbed minds all crying out in unison. Every person who had ever been consumed by a necromorph, every consciousness that had been absorbed into the collective, they were all there, trapped within the moon's gestalt awareness. But the machine, Isaac realized, could be reactivated. The aliens had built it to be turned on again if needed, perhaps hoping their world might one day be restored. Isaac understood that he could use it differently. Instead of simply freezing the planet again, he could reconfigure the machine to specifically target the Brethren moon itself, to lock it in a form of stasis that would prevent it from ever completing its awakening. It was a desperate plan with no guarantee of success, but it was the only option available. As the planet shook and the ice continued to crack, as necromorphs swarmed from every crevice and the moon's psychic assault threatened to shatter his mind, Isaac Clarke did what he had always done. He solved the problem in front of him. Racing through the collapsing alien facility, Isaac and Carver worked together to reboot the machine's systems and redirect its power. The process required them to manually override safeties, reroute power conduits, and essentially jury-rig an alien device that had been built millions of years before human civilization existed. It was engineering on an impossible scale, but Isaac's unique experience with marker technology and his natural brilliance allowed him to understand the underlying principles. As the machine powered up, its effects were immediate and dramatic. The temperature plummeted, the atmosphere began to refreeze, and most critically, the Brethren moon's awakening was halted. The creature's psychic scream of rage and frustration echoed across the planet and beyond, reaching out through space to its brethren. But it was trapped, locked in stasis by the machine's power, unable to complete its emergence or communicate effectively with the other moons. For the first time since the crisis began, humanity had struck a real blow against the markers and their creators. The threat was not eliminated entirely, the other Brethren moons still existed, Earth was still in danger, and the marker network remained active, but the moon on Tau Volantis had been neutralized. Isaac had proven that the Brethren moons could be stopped, that humanity was not helpless before these cosmic predators. The victory, however, came at a tremendous cost. The facility was collapsing around them, the planet's surface was becoming increasingly unstable, and their means of escape had been destroyed in the earlier fighting. As Isaac activated the final sequence, he and Carver found themselves trapped in the alien structure with no clear way out. The last transmissions from the planet were fragmentary and unclear. Isaac's final words to Ellie, broadcast as the facility came apart, were a mixture of hope and resignation. He had done what he set out to do. He had found the truth about the markers, discovered the existence of the Brethren moons, and found a way to stop them. Whether he would survive to see the fruits of that victory remained uncertain as the ice and darkness closed in around him. Against all odds, Isaac Clarke and John Carver survived the destruction of the Codex on Tau Volantis. The machine that was supposed to freeze the necromorph moon and halt convergence has been destroyed, and the two engineers find themselves adrift in the debris field surrounding the shattered planet. The year remains 2514, but the universe has fundamentally changed. The Brethren moons, those ancient cosmic entities that have been orchestrating humanity's destruction since the discovery of the first marker, are now fully awake. The opening moments of their survival are disorienting. Isaac and Carver regain consciousness aboard a derelict section of the CMS Terra Nova, the massive ship that brought them to Tau Volantis in the first place. The vessel has been catastrophically damaged during the moon's awakening, torn apart by gravitational forces and necromorph attacks. The sections they now inhabit are barely functional, life support systems failing, hull breaches everywhere. They are trapped in a floating coffin with no clear means of escape and no way to contact Earth or any remaining EarthGov forces. But they are not alone in the wreckage. As Isaac and Carver navigate the shattered corridors of the Terra Nova, they quickly discover that other survivors have also taken refuge in the debris. These survivors, however, are not the rational, desperate people you might expect in such circumstances. They are Unitologists, members of the Church of Unitology who have embraced the most extreme interpretation of their faith. These cultists believe that the awakening of the Brethren Moons represents the fulfillment of Altman's prophecy, that convergence is not an extinction event but rather a form of transcendence, a glorious transformation into something greater than human. The psychological horror of the situation becomes immediately apparent. These Unitologists have witnessed the awakening of the moons. They have seen the cosmic reality that Isaac and Carver now understand. But instead of recoiling in terror, instead of fighting for survival, they have embraced it. They see Isaac and Carver not as fellow survivors but as obstacles to salvation, as heretics who destroyed the Codex and temporarily delayed the inevitable convergence. The cultists attack on sight, their minds so thoroughly broken by marker influence and religious fervor that they have become willing sacrifices to the necromorph cause. The environment itself reflects this descent into madness. The Unitologists have transformed sections of the Terra Nova into shrines, painting marker symbols across every available surface with blood and other substances. Bodies are arranged in ritualistic patterns, offerings to the moons they now worship. The distinction between the living cultists and the necromorphs that stalk the same corridors becomes increasingly blurred. Both serve the same purpose. Both seek to prevent Isaac and Carver from escaping. Both are instruments of convergence. As they fight through the ship, Isaac and Carver begin experiencing intense hallucinations. The proximity to the awakened moons amplifies the marker signal to unprecedented levels. Isaac sees visions of Nicole again, but these manifestations are different from before. She no longer pretends to offer comfort or guidance. Instead, she speaks with the voice of the moons themselves, taunting him with the futility of his resistance. The moons show him images of Earth, of the other colony worlds, all falling to convergence. They want him to understand that his actions on Tau Volantis, his destruction of the Codex, accomplished nothing. The moons were already awake. The signal was already spreading. Humanity's fate was already sealed. Carver experiences his own torments, visions of his dead family twisted into accusations and prophecies of doom. The psychological barriers that allowed him to function during the mission to Tau Volantis are crumbling under the relentless assault of the marker signal. Both men are being pushed to the absolute limits of their sanity, forced to question whether survival is even possible, whether it is even desirable in a universe where such cosmic horrors exist. The true scope of the catastrophe becomes clear when they manage to access what remains of the Terra Nova's communication systems. The fragmented transmissions they receive from human space paint a picture of absolute devastation. The Brethren Moons have begun their assault on Earth and the colonies. These are not military attacks in any conventional sense. The moons themselves are weapons, each one a massive convergence of billions of absorbed minds, each one capable of projecting the marker signal across entire star systems. Where the moons go, necromorph outbreaks follow, populations turn on themselves, the dead rise, and new biomass is added to the collective. The transmissions describe scenes of apocalyptic horror. On Earth, multiple necromorph outbreaks have erupted simultaneously across every major population center. The markers that were being studied in secret facilities, the markers that EarthGov and the sovereign colonies had been researching for decades, have all activated in concert. The carefully controlled experiments have become extinction events. Billions of people are dying, transforming, being absorbed into the growing necromorph masses that will eventually form new convergence events, new moons to add to the Brethren. The colony worlds are faring no better. Uxor, Aspera, Kremar, Adelon, all the settlements that humanity established across the stars are experiencing simultaneous outbreaks. The marker signal reaches across light years, coordinating the attacks with perfect precision. This is the true nature of the Brethren Moons revealed at last. They are not simply predators or parasites, they are a form of cosmic intelligence that has perfected the art of species-wide extinction, that has consumed countless civilizations across millions of years, that has turned the cycle of life and death itself into a feeding mechanism. Isaac and Carver realize they have to try to warn someone, anyone who might still be fighting. They need to tell humanity what they learned on Tau Volantis, that the markers are not alien artifacts to be studied, but rather bait in a trap. That convergence is not a phenomenon to be controlled, but rather the final stage of a predetermined extinction cycle. If there is any hope of resistance, any possibility of survival, It depends on humanity understanding what they are truly facing. They work desperately to repair enough of the Terra Nova's systems to send a coherent transmission. The ship is falling apart around them, necromorphs and cultists attacking constantly, life support failing section by section. Carver's engineering expertise and Isaac's problem-solving abilities are pushed to their absolute limits. Every repair requires scavenging parts from other systems. Every step forward risks catastrophic failure. The marker signal continues its assault on their minds, trying to break them, trying to make them give up or join the cultists in embracing convergence. During this desperate effort, they encounter the cult's leader, a unitologist who has taken the title of prophet. This individual has been completely consumed by the marker signal, speaking in the voices of the moons, channeling their will directly. The prophet explains to Isaac and Carver that their resistance is meaningless, that the moons have been guiding human evolution since before recorded history, that every step of technological advancement has been shepherded to bring humanity to this moment. The markers were placed in humanity's path deliberately, designed to be irresistible to any species capable of spaceflight and advanced technology. The confrontation with the prophet is both physical and psychological. The cult leader is surrounded by devoted followers willing to die to protect him, and the battle takes place in a section of the ship that is actively depressurizing. But the real assault comes from the prophet's words, from the truths he speaks mixed with the lies, from the way he articulates the cosmic horror that Isaac and Carver have been trying not to fully comprehend. The moons are not evil in any human sense. They are simply fulfilling their nature, following a pattern established long before humanity existed, a pattern that will continue long after humanity is gone. Isaac and Carver manage to kill the prophet and his closest followers, but the victory feels hollow. They have seen too much, understood too much. The knowledge of what the Brethren Moons truly are, of the scale of the threat facing humanity, weighs on them with crushing force. They are just two men, exhausted and traumatized, trying to survive in a universe that has revealed itself to be far more hostile and uncaring than they ever imagined. Finally, they succeed in getting a communication system online. They begin broadcasting a warning to any human forces that might still be operational. Isaac speaks directly, explaining what they discovered on Tau Volantis, describing the nature of the Brethren Moons, pleading with anyone who can hear to destroy all markers, to abandon any research into convergence, to focus every resource on survival and resistance. He knows the message may not reach anyone. He knows that even if it does, it may be too late. But he has to try. As they transmit their warning, they manage to get the ship's observation systems working long enough to see what is happening in the space around them. The view is apocalyptic. Multiple Brethren Moons have gathered in the system, massive beyond comprehension, their surfaces writhing with necromorph biomass. They are not attacking Tau Volantis, there is nothing left there to consume. Instead, they are preparing to move on to other systems, to continue their harvest of humanity. And then Isaac and Carver see something that confirms their worst fears. In the distance, visible even across the vast gulf of space, they can see Earth. The moons have come to humanity's homeworld. The planet that gave birth to the species, the world that Michael Altman tried to save 200 years ago, is now under siege by cosmic horrors that view it as nothing more than a feeding ground. The transmissions they have been receiving suddenly make terrible sense. This is not just an attack on colonies or outposts. This is the end of human civilization as it has existed. The two men watch in horror as the moons approach Earth. They can see the marker signal pulsing from the ancient entities, can feel it even across the distance, a psychic assault that makes their previous experiences with marker influence seem trivial by comparison. The hallucinations intensify. Nicole appears to Isaac one final time, and through her, the moons speak directly to him. They thank him for his role in their awakening, for destroying the codex that kept them frozen, for ensuring that convergence could proceed as intended. Isaac rejects this narrative with every fiber of his being. He insists that he was trying to stop them, that humanity will fight, that extinction is not inevitable. But the moons simply laugh through Nicole's voice. They have heard such defiance before, from countless species across the eons. It always ends the same way. The cycle is perfect, refined over millions of years. Humanity will fall just as all the others fell. The final moments of Awakened are deliberately ambiguous and deeply unsettling. Isaac and Carver, having sent their warning, having done everything they possibly could, are left adrift in space with a view of Earth's impending doom. They have no way to reach the planet, no way to help in the battle they know is coming. They can only watch as the Brethren Moons close in on humanity's last stronghold. The screen fades not to black, but to a view of Earth surrounded by moons, the planet's lights beginning to flicker and die as convergence spreads across its surface. The story of Dead Space, which began with a simple distress call from a mining ship, ends with the potential extinction of the entire human species, with cosmic horrors beyond comprehension claiming their harvest, with two traumatized survivors bearing witness to the end of everything they knew. And so, from the first discovery of the black marker on Earth in 2214 to Isaac Clarke's final desperate transmission as the Brethren Moons converge on humanity's last refugees in 2514, the Dead Space timeline chronicles 3 centuries of mankind's tragic inability to recognize the true nature of the threat it had unearthed. What began as a seemingly miraculous energy solution, a strange alien artifact promising unlimited power, and the end of resource scarcity revealed itself to be the most insidious trap ever conceived. A galaxy spanning reproductive cycle, billions of years in the making, that had already consumed countless civilizations before humanity's turn came. The markers, far from being gifts or even neutral relics, were sophisticated instruments of conversion, psychologically manipulating any intelligent species that discovered them into creating the very conditions necessary for their own extinction, turning their dead into component biomass for newborn brethren moons. The Church of Unitology, born from Michael Altman's initial contact with the black marker, became the perfect vehicle for the marker's purpose, spreading their influence through faith rather than science, ensuring that even when governments tried to suppress or control marker research, true believers would continue the work of convergence. The Earth government's attempts to weaponize and exploit the markers, creating dozens of red markers across human space in a catastrophically misguided effort to solve the resource crisis, only accelerated the timeline toward extinction, seeding every major colony and station with the instruments of its own destruction. Isaac Clarke, an everyman engineer thrust into extraordinary circumstances aboard the USG Ishimura, became the unwilling focal point of this cosmic horror, his mind marked and manipulated from his very first encounter, chosen by the markers as both test subject and potential architect of convergence. His journey from the blood-soaked corridors of the Ishimura to the frozen wastes of Tau Volantis traced humanity's last desperate attempts to understand and stop the marker signal, each step revealing new layers of the conspiracy and the true scale of the threat. The Sprawl Outbreak demonstrated that even Earth's doorstep was not safe, that the marker's influence could turn humanity's greatest achievements, its massive space stations and teeming populations, into feeding grounds for necromorph conversion. Ellie, Langford, Carver, and the other survivors who fought alongside Isaac represented the best of humanity's resilience, but also its limitations, capable of surviving individual outbreaks but unable to grasp the full scope of the Brethren Moon's design until far too late. The revelation on Tau Volantis that the frozen planet held not salvation but merely a delay, that the machine built by the alien civilization there had only postponed their convergence rather than preventing it, shattered any hope that humanity might find a technological solution to the marker threat. That ancient species, far more advanced than humanity, had still fallen to the marker's influence, their entire civilization reduced to a single frozen moon and a warning that went unheeded for millions of years. The sovereign colonies, even in their rebellion against Earth and rejection of the markers, could not escape the web that had been woven, their leader Norton falling victim to the same dementia and manipulation that had claimed so many others, their military might meaningless against an enemy that turned death itself into a weapon. Jacob Danique and the Circle, the most fervent believers in Unitology's promise of transcendence through convergence, achieved their goal of awakening the Brethren Moons, but found no ascension, no transformation into something greater, only the horror of realizing they had doomed their entire species for a lie. The markers never promised salvation to individuals, only to the moons themselves, using humanity's hopes and fears, its religions and sciences, its desperate search for meaning and energy, as tools to facilitate their birth. When Isaac and Carver destroyed the Codex and stopped Tau Volantis' convergence, they won a single battle but lost the war, because that act served as a signal, a dinner bell that awakened every brother moon in the galaxy and pointed them toward Earth and the remaining human colonies. The DLC Awakened showed the true cost of that Pyrrhic victory as Isaac and Carver fought their way off Tau Volantis only to witness the moon's approach, vast, beyond comprehension, dozens or hundreds of them converging on human space, each one a monument to a dead civilization that had fallen into the same trap. The visions, the hallucinations, the constant psychological warfare that the markers waged against human minds, all of it served the singular purpose of the moon's reproduction, a cycle that had repeated across the galaxy for eons and was now reaching its conclusion for humanity. Every outbreak, every necromorph, every person driven mad by the marker signal, every believer who spread Unitology's gospel, every scientist who studied the markers seeking knowledge or power, every government official who saw them as solutions rather than threats, all were unwitting participants in a process that predated human civilization by billions of years. The timeline shows not just a series of events, but a pattern, the same pattern that had played out on countless worlds, with humanity following the script written into the marker's very design, unable to deviate despite warnings, despite evidence, despite the mounting body count. From the moment the black marker was unearthed, humanity's fate was likely sealed, the only variables being how long the process would take and how